It's quiet. I think yours is the first part, isn't it, Owen?
Yes, Councillor. Could I just get confirmation? Do we have the YouTube feed coming through on the YouTube channel?
We're just checking that now, Chen.
Yeah. So we'll just make sure that's working, and then we can get into item 1 and go from there.
Okay.
Owen, you're good to go.
Good to go.
It's streaming to YouTube.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Mandy. Okay, so good evening, members, colleagues, and members of the public tuning in via the Council's YouTube channel. This is the first scrutiny panel meeting that will be operating under the new Council meeting procedure rules for virtual meetings. As this is also the first scrutiny panel meeting for the 2020-2021 municipal year, I'll be kicking off as the Democratic Services Support Officer for this panel to ask members, as part of item 1, to please put forward nominations for a chair for the panel for this municipal year. And if members, if you could please, Councillor Bentley.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Beverly Davies as chair.
That's the nomination. Do I have a second?
Second that, please.
Do I have any further nominations for the position of chair? I will take that. No, that's great. So if we could take this to a vote, I will proceed through reading out each member's name in turn. When I call your name, if you could please cast your vote. So starting off with Councillor Bentley.
For.
Councillor Bourne. Councillor Bourne, if you could, if you could unmute and cast your vote.
For.
Councillor Bourne, for. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Davies, for. Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Hayter.
For.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Hogg, for. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor McCarthy, for. And Councillor Whitehead.
For.
Councillor Whitehead, for. So unanimous approval. Unanimous approval for Councillor Davies to be appointed chair of the scrutiny panel for 2020 to 2021. Second order of business, to appoint a deputy chair for the panel for this coming municipal year. So if I could take nomination, please.
I nominate Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley is nominated by Councillor Davies. And could I have a second, please?
Happy to second that.
Seconded by Councillor Dundas. So again, same procedure. I'll proceed through alphabetically calling out your names. When I call out your name, please cast your vote. So Councillor Bentley.
For.
Councillor Bentley, for. Councillor Bourne.
For.
Councillor Bourne, for. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Davies, for. Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Dundas, for. Councillor Hayter.
For.
Councillor Hayter, for. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Hogg, for. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor McCarthy, for. Councillor Whitehead.
For.
Councillor Whitehead, for. Again, that's a unanimous vote to approve Councillor Bentley to be deputy chairman of the panel for the coming municipal year. And with that, I will hand you over to the newly appointed Councillor Beverly Davies as the chair, and she will chair the meeting from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Thanks for your help there. And thank you all for voting for me as well and for electing me as your chairman. Just like to say hello and welcome to everybody to this online meeting. on Monday, the 1st of June 2020. I'm Councillor Beverly Davies. I'm Councillor for Criticate Ward, and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to watch afterwards. To begin with, there are a few matters of housekeeping. With the exception of the Democratic Services Officer advising us, would participants all please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak. I will ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask each member of the panel in turn if they wish to ask a question or make a comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote. You may also indicate if you wish to speak by using the raise hand function during the discussion. We may have a break at 7:30, subject to the progress of the business and how you're all feeling, how comfortable you all are. So introductions, if we could do our introductions, please, and I will go around and invite you to introduce yourself. Councillor Bentley, please.
Councillor Kevin Bentley, member for Markstown Lair Ward, and also thank you for your support as Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne, please.
Councillor Tina Bourne, Labour member for Greensted Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas, please.
Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter, please.
Chris Hayter, councillor for St John's and St Anne's Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Councillor Mike Hogg, councillor for the Saints, St Anne's and St John's Wards.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, Shrub End Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Whitehead.
Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, Labour member for Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Thank you very much. Do we need to go through all of the Democratic Services officers who are supporting us today? Owen, or do we?
If you think that would help, we can certainly introduce ourselves. Yes, Councillor. I'll start off again. Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Officer.
Amanda Chidgey, Democratic Services Officer.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Item 4, substitutions. I don't think we have any tonight. Item 5, urgent items. Again, we haven't been notified of any. Declarations of interest, please. Councillor Hogg.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest in agenda item 12, 5.38 little a, under council decision making, having been in receipt of government grant via Colchester Borough Council for the small business that I run as a charitable trust.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Kevin Bentley, please.
He's mooted.
Thank you. I have the same interest as Councillor Hogg on item 12, except I run a company in Colchester and a receipt of the government business grant. And it's a pecuniary interest, but I've been advised I don't need to leave the meeting. I also have, again, under advisement from the monitoring officer, in item 13, because NEGC is mentioned, of which Essex County Council is a partner in, that is an interest, but we're not making a decision, therefore I don't need to leave the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas, please.
Likewise, I need to declare that I have an interest, that I have a share of ownership in a business which received the one of the government provided rates grants.
Thank you. And Councillor Tina Bourne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 12, I have an interest as a trustee of a charity that is in receipt of government grant for business rate relief.
Thank you. And I need to declare the same interest as all those preceding me, as in trustee of a charity which has received the government grant. Thank you. Would you like to lower your hands, please? Otherwise I get confused. Thank you. Right, we're looking at the minutes of the last two meetings. We've got the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of January. If I could go through and get your comments or approval, please. Councillor Bentley, 28th of January minutes.
I was not present. Councillor Willett's substituted, so therefore I shan't vote.
Ah, okay, thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Yes, I'm happy.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Yes, I'm fine with those. I can't see any issues.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Yeah, absolutely fine, no problem.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Fine, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Fine here as well.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Fine for me too, thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's the minutes of the 28th of January agreed. And going on to the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of February. Councillor Bentley.
I was present and I'm very happy with them, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Agreed.
Councillor Dundas.
Likewise, agreed.
Councillor Hayter.
Yep, agreed.
Councillor Hogg.
Agreed, Madam Chairman.
Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
And Councillor Whitehead.
I wasn't present, so I won't vote on this one.
Okay, thank you. Right, so that's the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of February, also agreed. Right, next item is General Have Your Say. We have no speakers who've given notice that they wish to say anything. Have we got anyone who's crept into the meeting to say anything? I don't think we do we? We've got decisions taken under special urgency provisions. There were 3 decisions taken under the Council's emergency decision-making protocols. 2 of those are dealt with in item 12 this evening under 5.38, and a further decision was taken by Councillor Corey on the 27th of May, which was after publication of this meeting agenda, and that was for the COVID-19 discretionary business grants. The summary, the report provided information on the government's discretionary business grant scheme. It detailed the council's proposals for how the grants are to be validated and distributed with effect from 25th of May. I think that should possibly be 26th of May because 25th was the bank holiday. And the decision required is to consider, examine and agree the proposals for eligibility criteria and the process for the distribution of the grants as detailed in this in that report. I did have a look. I was asked to look at that under the special urgency provisions, which I was happy with. I did have a good half-hour's conversation with Sam about that particular report, and there was 1 or 2 minor changes made as a result of that, but certainly I was happy with it. And obviously there was a definite need for that to be agreed quite quickly. So that one's also been agreed. Item 10, we have no cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review. And under item 11, A and B, no requests from councillors for an item to be reviewed by the scrutiny panel. So on to item 12. This is the council's response to the coronavirus pandemic. We have Councillor Corey with it looks like a haircut there. I'm not quite sure how you managed to get that, squeeze that in. And would you like to introduce this item, please?
Good evening, Madam Chairman. We're just sharing the report at the same time. I will pass to the Chief Executive as well to say a few words for the organisation, and just to for you and for other members of the public, I cut my own hair. I did not break the rules and didn't do a bad job. Talking of not a bad job, this paper outlines the excellent work that the council has done during this time to ensure that our residents have been as safe as possible and services have run in the safest way possible. So if we go through the paper, you will see that we acted very quickly and we acted earlier than perhaps the government guidelines suggested, because we felt that was the right thing to do. So within the paper, especially if you go down further to where it outlines the sales, I think it's page 36, possibly, Owen. And we divided our response into a number of cells. So those were the organisational cell, the business cell, community and housing. So we focused very much on those key areas because we had to be targeted in our response. We had to be quick and dynamic. So as you go through the paper, you'll see an explanation of each one. I'll go quickly through those and see what the Chief Executive Officer would like to add after me. So in terms of the organisation, it explains how we adapted services very quickly, realigned services, conducted a skills survey of our staff. But because of the digital transformation that we've been through, and actually on national calls and talking to other councils, I'm always impressed how far further forward we were than many other councils, and that enabled us to move quickly to home working. We did purchase in advance extra equipment for example, our customer services team, who have to have the whole kit and in particular software that they use that they didn't have on laptops they would have used at home. So to ensure they had the software, the hardware for a number of services, we brought in some extra equipment for that to go home and carry out that service. So there was no break in the service for customer services. And also because we knew we would have more communication coming in, especially from businesses and worried residents. On the 16th of March, we gave staff clear instructions to work from home. And as I say, they were equipped to do so. So that this was a successful and quick move. On the 19th, we'd completed our skills survey. So we knew where we could realign staff where possible, move them to either frontline services if their backline service was not going to be used as frequently. So there's been some parts of our staff organisation that have not been able to carry out work ever since the 19th, when the public buildings had to close as well. So again, we took that decision prior to the government, but it was coming towards a point where we felt we had to act for safety. So things like Leisure World, where we knew it was really important we did not spread or enable the spread of coronavirus through equipment that everyone would touch, despite taking early steps to make sure we had cleaning products, sanitization of the equipment. We still felt it was a high risk, and we had to close those buildings along with the town hall and others, museums, of course. So sadly, we have had to shut a number of services, some of which are still closed. I have, with the team, developed a traffic light service that is out there on our social media that shows which services are green and fully up and running, which services are amber and are in partial use, and which services remain closed in line with government guidelines and in line with safety. So the staff realigned very well. I want to thank every member of our staff who has been working in the back office or the front line in particular, and those who have realigned, and also those who have been furloughed through the process that we agreed to take, where I've also brought in other leaders, group leaders, into this decision making. It was a cross-party support for furlough in the end, once we'd got enough detail about it and understood what we were doing, giving towards 300 staff the option individually to take that. If they rejected that, that was okay, they would not be furloughed. But we felt it was the right thing to do, to use the government scheme legitimately, because the cost of staff compared to the lack of income was really hurting Colchester's finances. Now, Councillor King will tell you ably later on the finance paper where we're heading with the finances, and that due to our prudent management of the finances, we will be able to use some reserves and look at different ways of making savings and looking at efficiencies. But we are in a difficult position, like many other councils are, due to the loss of income thanks to COVID. If I just move on to the other areas, so we had business, and there again we have supported businesses with over 93% of those eligible for the rate relief. We've got out there, we've given it to them. We did a big number very early on, very quickly. The more difficult it becomes, sort of the smaller businesses we've got to find or don't have the details for, it sort of takes a bit longer. And we're also, as you just said at the start of the meeting, developed our extra discretionary service, where the government has said you can use 5% of the money that was allocated and to get out there and try and support other businesses who weren't valid for the initial transfer of support. We realigned services. We even took some staff from the Mercury who supported us on the business side, calling up businesses, chasing them up, making sure they had the opportunity to get the relief. And we got, as I say, over 93% of that out, almost £30 million. We also invested £9,500 into Colbia, which is for a one-to-one service for businesses who call up Colby and want support. And that has been used a lot. And actually some people are being quite entrepreneurial with that advice as well, where some businesses sadly are not doing so well at this time. Others are seeing a gap in the market and starting businesses. David might talk about in the finance paper as well about opportunities looking forward with recovery, about supporting business and looking at ways in which we can incubate and provide space for businesses so people don't have to rush back into London. They could stay around here but work away from home. In terms of housing, you have Councillor Fox on the call as well. We have managed our housing stock very well in this time and managed to house an extra 32 individuals who were presenting as homeless during this crisis, to make sure they were safe and to make sure they were not at danger of spreading the disease whilst they were rough sleeping. So we have had Gareth Mitchell, the head of CBH, on our calls frequently so that we could absolutely work together in housing. And the astonishing number of vulnerable residents that CBH have contacted has been amazing. And I think they've helped to save lives in the work that they've done with the vulnerable people, getting there first, being proactive, not waiting for people to come to us, getting out there and supporting them. So I really want to thank the team at CBH for their work, supporting vulnerable people, bringing in vulnerable people off the streets, and their work now going forward to ensure that they keep those people safe that they have housed and find a place for them in the future. And also where we've had problems with domestic violence during this period, to make sure that people are housed and those victims are looked after correctly, and we keep families together where possible with the perpetrator gone. On that note as well, we've worked closely with the police over this period. We've worked closely with all our community partners. Now, this is one of the most excellent examples of how Colchester has been resilient. And because of the coordination of partnership working that we have done as a council over the last years and months in particular, revitalising One Colchester, as some of you might know through your charity work, One Colchester has been a really strong, fantastic example, beacon that we can talk about nationally for what they've done. And there's a really good video out there that brings together all the partners that have worked in One Colchester, saying the thousands of people that have helped, we've helped as a partnership in Colchester. From the police, from getting the health service there every week to make sure we know exactly what's happening in the acute setting, in the community and GP settings, but also at care homes too, getting updates, seeing how we can help each other. The cultural organisations in there supporting as well, the food bank, other charities, Essex County Council, of course, with their vital role there. So brought together really well also by Community 360. So Colchester Borough Council and Community 360 have coordinated this one partnership work, and Community 360 have really helped coordinate the community work with the volunteers and the volunteer groups from across Colchester. So I thank them as well for their key role now over the last few weeks and going forward. So thank you to Tracy and her team at 360, Community 360. Pretty much those are the 4 areas I've tried to cover as much as possible. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what we have done to protect our residents and to protect services. I think you all understand very well as councillors, because we also have communicated as readily as we can, giving you as much briefing as possible. Those have been regularly coming out each week. We have brought in group leaders every week for meetings. And as I said, we wanted to work cross-party. So I brought in the other leaders into my leadership meetings with my cabinet in order to be fully briefed on what was happening and to take part in decision making. And I'm proud of that working together. And I think we've had better decisions as a result, and the partnership working that we have had with other partners beyond us as councillors. So that will be the end of my report. I'll happily answer any questions, and the Chief Executive, I'm sure, will also update anything more that I've missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Mr. Pritchard, was there anything you wanted to come in with, or are you happy to wait for questions?
Yeah, can I just do a short piece, if that's all right? Councillor Corey has taken you through the organisational cells that we put in place, but I did just want to say a few words about the fact that when the lockdown of the country on the 23rd of March took place, you know, our lives changed, didn't it, really? And therefore, that a number of people have lost their lives due to COVID-19, and it's had a profound effect on our communities and on our businesses, certainly on our families and on a range of individuals. So our response to the COVID crisis was quite clearly to implement the government's directions, because they were clear directions, closing our public buildings, as Councillor Corey has said, moving our office-based staff from home, and then with the lockdown, actually closing a number of our services. Again, Councillor Corey's talked about that. What I would say is I was delighted with my executive management team, each one of whom took one of those cells, the organisational cell, the community cell, the business cell, and as Councillor Corey said, that Gareth Mitchell, the Chief Executive of Colchester Borough Homes, took the housing cell. I wasn't going to say any more about the cells because clearly Councillor Corey has been through all of those with you. I could add some other detail and I'm happy to do that in the questioning. What I would say, Chair, is that during this crisis, I have used emergency powers of decision making to enable service, financial and organisational decisions to be made on a daily basis as the crisis unfolded. Now we're emerging from the pandemic, we all hope, don't we? I'm pleased that we are returning to the proper governance arrangements and council decision making again. As you rightly said earlier in the meeting, I think the report on page 40 details for you two of the major decisions which were taken using urgency and not emergency provisions in accordance with the scrutiny arrangements. So I think Appendix 1 for me just identifies and captures for you a timeline showing the significant and I think the quite massive response that the Borough Council has had to put in place, quite rightly, on a range of in a range of areas and a range of services. Chair, perhaps I could just finish. I won't take much more of your time, but just to say that, you know, in this unprecedented situation, I have also been delighted with the partnership approach to dealing with this crisis from all the statutory agencies involved, Colchester Community 360, as Councillor Corey's identified, and the array of voluntary groups who have played their part, I think, quite magnificently. And also to the individuals and their many and regular small acts of kindness, which I've seen and heard about. And finally, to my own organisation, the Borough Council, and each and every one of my colleagues, from the refuse collectors collecting the waste daily, to the IT staff who've enabled so many of us to work remotely, the helpline staff who've been out and literally picked up thousands of people who have fallen in their homes during this period, to the business rates team who have delivered those grants that a number of you have actually been recipients of. Our cemetery staff who have been so respectful to families and bereaved loved ones in difficult circumstances, and even the small team who put together so efficiently, but I think quite comprehensively, that neighbourhood resource pack that we sent around. And perhaps finally to my own senior management team, who I think have done everything I've asked of them. And I have to say many things that I never even thought of asking them. So, Chair, thank you for allowing me just to say a few words about the Council's response to the COVID crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is I will go through the roll call of the panel and invite you to make some representations if you wish. Councillor Bentley.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I would echo virtually everything that's been said, that I think the response has been extraordinary, from officers to councillors, actually to members of the public as well. It's just been amazing. And I'm rather struck by the words of the Prime Minister very early on when he said, I paraphrase slightly, that during this pandemic, you will know people in your family and or friends who will die. And I'm not sure we all really fully understood that, but now we do, don't we? And it's been awful for lots of people. And other people have supported those and within our own organisation. So I think we should record our thanks as well as certainly I do as a panel member. I'm sure others will come in and say so afterwards. I just want to ask something and then just ask a question for me. So I think the paper is excellent, takes us through very clearly what took place and on a timeline. I think it would be useful for the objective of transparency to have a full log published of what decision was made by whom and for what reason. I think that would be useful. There are things listed in there, certainly, and there's a list of events that took place. I think it would just be easy for the public to see, in case there's ever questioned, and I'm sure at some stage there's going to be some national inquiry into this. It'd be useful to have that, I think. I do just want to highlight the refuse, because it's a bit of a learning understanding for me, because we clearly took a decision that was not taken by other local authorities within Essex or the country. And I know it was lots of things were flying around at the time, and I think this is the place now just to bring out the facts, which would be useful for everyone, as to why we took a decision not to collect green waste and not to collect recyclables, except for a limited collection of those. I think this is the chance now for officers and also the leader and maybe others, just put on public record the reasons why and why they felt we took those decisions and other councils didn't take those decisions. You might say it's up to them, but I just wonder what the difference was. Other than that, I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to each of those in turn, or it's probably easier to do that actually rather than wait till the end, and we may find that there are some questions that are answered for other people. Who wanted to come back on those questions? Councillor Corey, perhaps?
I'm happy to get some support from the officers so I don't say anything or forget anything on the waste point in particular, because I am absolutely aware that the lead in the environment area, Rory Doyle, did send information to councillors explaining the situation, explaining exactly why we took these measures. And I think the closest in terms of Rory's management lead here is Dan Gascoigne, the Chief Operating Officer, who may want to come in. So also we had an explanation fully from the Cabinet member, Martin Goss, and really it was about safety and ensuring that we did not spread the virus by putting 3 refuse collectors into a cab at the time when the virus was increasingly spreading across our country. And the guidance was clear from the national waste body that you should not put too many people into a cab, because even with masks, it would not protect them, and then they could spread it. And they do go to every house in the borough, so they would be spreading it. If they were spreading it amongst themselves, they would then spread it perhaps around the borough. So for me, I believe that we had to do it for the safety of the staff and the safety of the residents, and to follow the guidance. Now, I was on a call with other Essex leaders who also were questioning and working out how to interpret the guidance. Some were saying, well, you have to interpret the guidance and therefore only have 2 in a cab. What we did do was we tried to implement that with as little restrictions as possible. But if you combine that with officers, waste collectors having to isolate due to their own personal circumstances, of which we have had some long-term shielded, but also those who've had to protect themselves because they may be with a shielded person or someone else who is unwell, then that meant we had less staff. So we had less staff and we had less availability of putting people into trucks. If we have a certain amount of trucks, which we do, and I'll pick out a number which is close but not exact, 30 trucks, and then suddenly you need to put only 2, not 3 people into a truck, you then would need another 10 to carry on the service in its fullest. So we believed that it was best to take safer options to make sure we had enough staff to cover those original trucks and not more, in order to carry out a safe service And yes, we did reduce the recycling, and we asked people to hold some of those dry recyclates for longer. Garden waste as well was paused. As you know, it's come back now this week. And we felt that that was the right thing to do at the time. As you know, Councillor Bentley is a cabinet member from county. The recycling centres were also shut for similar reasons of wanting to keep people safe there as well. And there were a number of options at the time that we were trying to look at to make it as safe as possible. For example, I know that a skip company provided a service, but we saw evidence of people not socially distancing when using that service. So our ideas for a possibility of that were, we were concerned that we again would not be putting the safety of residents and the safety of staff first. I will stop there. I don't want to go on too long, but I am still pleased that we've collected the black bag rubbish, the food waste rubbish all the way through. We have given people clear indication of how we would pick up recycling at a more lengthy period, and the green waste is now back. And that's because we protected staff and we did not spread the virus around the borough. Dan de Gascoigne, would you like to come in? Is there anything there that I've missed that you could help answer Councillor Bentley's question at all? Still can't hear you, Dan, unfortunately.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Apologies for that, and good evening, councillors. I think Councillor Corey has answered the question very well in summary. I mean, I'm more than happy to provide a written response, which might be the most appropriate because there is a lot of detail in terms of decisions that were taken. I would say that we were very proactive, actually, that well before the official lockdown, we took measures such as staggered start times, multiple crewing out areas around the depot, and other steps to ensure that we could maintain social distancing even before the lockdown happened. Decisions taken were taken in consultation with all group leaders, and we were very keen to ensure that any decisions we were taken to protect our staff. As an employer, it's absolutely our duty of care to ensure that we're not putting anyone at risk in doing their day job. And we also wanted to make sure that any changes that were being made to the system were made in a way that we would have most confidence that the changes would be sustainable, so that as we've started now to phase in the reintroduction of service, we've been able to do that and ensure that rounds are completed, that crews remain safe. And as Councillor Corey said, there was a number of steps that we took to ensure that even in the vehicles, we were able to maintain as far as possible social distancing guidelines in line with industry best practice.
May I come back?
Thank you.
May I come back? Yeah, so thank you. I think that was very important and very well done. That was excellent. It's important to have that, I think, in a public meeting. It's our first chance to scrutinise and get the story out there as it was. And I think you've told both of you brilliantly well. I don't want to lose sight of my first question about having a log, if we may, published, if that could be done. I think that would be very useful. And just one final question, because keeping people safe is absolutely right. And I think for the public's point of view, they couldn't quite understand why a neighbouring authority would carry on or we wouldn't. You've explained that brilliantly. And I just wonder, do we think then perhaps some of our neighbours did not interpret it in the safest way they could have done?
The short answer from me personally is yes, and also because we have an in-house service, and I think we are therefore more in touch with our staff, where some have external providers. The external provider very much wanted to keep to their targets and their contract without getting punished by the council, whereas we are different, we run it ourselves. And I think what Dan Gascoigne also added was what we did at the depot to keep people safe there as well was really important. So I'm pleased that we took those steps, and now with the R rate having come down, we can take steps to get the service back safely. But I do think we did the right thing. We acted early and on the guidance, and others still did not follow that national guidance.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to congratulate all the staff at CBC and CBH and our partners as well. We hear a lot about unprecedented times, but we've had an unprecedented response as well in these difficult times. And it would have been easy to panic because there was no blueprint to follow. Yes, all local authorities have a emergency plan, but this was far outside of any emergency plan any local authority could have. What I'm interested in is how the council feels that how the partnerships have strengthened possibly over time, and it's been an opportunity to recognise that some of our partners have really come into their own during these times and added more, because we have a synergy between the council and our partners. We don't like to have meetings. I know I've heard officers say this before. I've heard Mark, leader of the council, say this before. Let's not have a meeting just for meeting's sake. Let's have a meeting of partners where we're actually adding value. And in some very bizarre way, the response to COVID-19 has added value to what we do as a council. And I hope that we don't lose that as we go forward and come out and come into the next phase, whatever the next phase is, and there'll be a phase after that and a phase after that. So I'm very keen that we don't bombard officers with lots and lots of new initiatives, but we take stock each time we enter a new phase to bring forward anything else that we need to do. Is that possible, first of all, going forward, to identify each phase as we go through? And secondly, I'd like to thank Mark Corey and the administration for actually letting other groups into the tent, because there is a very keen desire sometimes just to batten down the hatches and close the doors and just to work within a very small protectionist way. And that doesn't feel like that to me. Very quickly, the Conservative group and the Independent group were invited into the meetings with the administration, a separate weekly meeting, additional to that, with senior officers. My notice is set up for all group leaders. And then in addition to that, a recovery meeting as we started to move into recovery phase as well. So we've not had this before since a Rainbow Coalition in 2001, I think that was. So that for me has been quite interesting. And I wondered whether, Mark, you felt the same way.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Absolutely. I'll sort of go backwards in terms of your questions in reverse. So yes, it's been positive, and it's something that suits my way of working. I'm open-minded and open to bringing in other people, because I do think two heads are better than one, and I do think that's how our administration works. And I wanted to ensure we brought together our whole community, and that is political as well. So it has been positive, and we have had a change of Conservative leader during that time, and we kept Robert Davidson, Councillor Davidson, on as a sort of temporary measure to ensure that the handover was worthwhile, and the independent groups as well. So I do feel that it has added, because, for example, that waste decision, the opposition leaders were able to get into the detail, to question, to flex, to bring ideas in. I know Councillor Davidson always had ideas. I think with his slightly different way of working out in the fields as he does. So he always used to bring in some interesting ideas, and to have you, Councillor Bourne, as well, was always incisive with some of your ideas and comments coming forward. And then Councillor Dundas, more recently, coming in as well with his commercial mind, has been helpful. So I take from all groups their contributions and welcome that in the future. And also, one thing is better scrutiny, and it's right to say it at this meeting, but actually that scrutiny at the time during those decision makings is important. I believe in that. I think it's how you get to better decisions. In terms of, again, partnership working, I want to thank people like Pam Donnelly, who's done a lot of work over the last few months with our partners. That has meant we were in the right place for this. And of course, no one wants to be in a place for this crisis to come, but we are in a place where we had foundations of partnership that were really deep rooted and really strong. And what you say about the future is correct. And I hope that hope will transfer into continued partnership working. So one of the quotes I had from one of the last urgent meetings we had is now moved into recovery with one partnership, one Colchester partnership. Someone said, it's been great that we've left the sovereignty at the door. We've left our titles and our organisations at the door. We haven't had barriers up. We haven't set hurdles. And we've worked together, and that should continue without people being precious about their organisation, about their work. And I really think that has come from good relationships before, excellent examples of working and leading from the front with organisations, and each person leading by example, that has brought us to a much more connected place. And also, I think I've mentioned One Colchester a number of times, but also the Town Deal Board and the Assembly and the wider members that Councillor King chairs that group as well. Together we have, again, looked at recovery, supported business, worked out how we can continue that work, even if it wasn't going to be what it originally was meant to be, which was how to promote Colchester and do all the wonderful things we wanted to do. Now it will be more recovery based, but still the work we have done there and talked about there has again united us. And I think that we're better placed to have that and One Colchester and the other partnerships we have out there. So I agree with you. I think we are in a better place, and there's lessons that have been learned about sort of reducing that sovereignty and that preciousness that we have, and working together without a badge or a title or an organisation as much. Was there another question at the start, or is that covering all of this?
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Bourne? Thank you. Councillor Dundas, do you have anything to ask, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll just make a few very general comments, which I think probably bore everybody, being similar to some of the previous ones. I mean, I think from a standing start, from day one, offices all shut, nobody knows what's happening. I think the response of the staff of Colchester Borough Council has been incredible. I think they've done a fantastic job. The quality of work has been outstanding. The quantity of work has been outstanding. And I think all 51 councillors can be very, very proud of all of them. I really do mean that. Just to pick out a few things, I think work on the shielding, the community support, Community 360, some of the things they've been doing. I think the standard of information going out to councillors and indeed to parish and town councils has been very good. It's been a lot of it, but there's been a lot of things to get out there. So that's fairly inevitable. The business support and information, I've actually been directing people towards, certainly in the early part of this crisis, whatever you want to call it, I've actually been directing people towards CBC's website for business advice, because actually I think it's been better than the government's. So total hat off credit to whoever wrote that. I think they did a really, really good job. On the housing particularly, I think we can be very proud of the work done with the rough sleepers. Did a really good job there. I'm pleased to see the government seem to have, from a few things I saw the other day, realised that actually having got a lot of people off the streets, it would be very nice to keep it that way. If we can stop them going back, that would be absolutely fantastic. Councillor Corey is quite correct, particularly on the furlough. That's something we discussed, and all four groups agreed on. I think it was the right decision. It was done in consultation with the staff and the unions, and I think it was the right thing to do. As Councillor Bourne said, yes, the leaders' discussions, I mean, they've been robust. We haven't agreed on everything. We've had some quite thorough discussions. I think if nothing else, we've all come away from them with a little bit better understanding of each other's positions and indeed each other's issues, particularly the recovery leadership group. If nothing else, it's a good group leader self-help group. But I think it does prove that actually there is a lot of cross-party interest, because at the end of the day, we're all, why do we do this? We don't do it for the glamour or the money. We do it because we care about culture. So it's where we live, and we want to try and do our best. On the business grants, which were mentioned, yes, the business rates team did a really good job. They were, I spoke to them on a number of occasions, on one occasion for myself and on other occasions for other people, and they were almost sort of begging to give money away. They were really trying very, very hard within the rules. Just obviously, it's not, the paper talks about businesses receiving them. Obviously, businesses covers a lot of different things. There are a lot of charities, village halls, community halls, play groups, scout huts, all sorts of organisations have received money, and in some cases it saved them. I know of a couple locally who, certainly I can think of some village halls, would have been in a great deal of trouble without them, because like a lot of organisations, they lost their income overnight and didn't know when they were going to get it back. In terms of things we haven't agreed on, I think there is never any harm after something like this in looking back and saying what didn't work. I mean, a lot of things did work, and frankly, they worked a lot better than in our wildest imaginations we could have thought they would. But where something hasn't worked, there's no harm in looking back and saying, actually, where are our weaknesses? You know, what do we need to improve? What services did struggle? And, you know, if you take that in a constructive manner and look at it and say, well, actually, yeah, okay, I was quite surprised by perhaps the number of absences, or this happened or whatever, then you improve it, and you end up at the end of the day with a better service and a better council afterwards. So there's not actually any harm in doing that if it's done perhaps in the right approach. But generally, I think to everybody in CBC, well done.
Thank you. Can I just pick up on the website? Because I was pleased with how quickly that came on board, how quickly it transformed as well. We had to keep evolving it as different information came out. And I do think that has been a real positive as well, of how we have given residents information. And the statistics show that, and we had many people coming through the website and using it. And then we could see where they would go within the website, which bits they use best. So that definitely was, for businesses in particular, highly used. So as you say, very, very useful, and actually more helpful for the government than the government often. One thing I forgot to say just in relation to Councillor Bourne was what I liked was how we worked with the food bank very well as well. And thank you to all other 50 councillors who contributed part of their locality budget to that. That was a nice, pleasant story to cover during the crisis, and it definitely has kick-started and helped the food bank get even more volunteers and support. I won't take any more time, Chair, but I'm sure there's other questions that come my way.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter, do you have any questions, please?
Thank you. I've got no particular questions, but I would like to just place on record my thanks for everyone involved, all the various officers and cabinet members with the decision making throughout the process. I don't think it can be underestimated how difficult it can be for some of the teams having to change the way they're working, how fast things were happening. And I've been thoroughly impressed with how quick communications come out and updates for all of us councillors to keep us in the loop of everything. So hats off to everyone that's been involved in that. It's really been appreciated, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hayter. Councillor Hogg, do you have any questions, please?
Oh, excuse me, Madam Chairman. Comment just to say that obviously very impressed with the report, and particularly when read in conjunction with the timeline. And for me, it's all about community. We've learnt an awful lot on the ground here in the Saints, particularly when we've closed the Oak Tree Centre to the community. No weddings, christenings, funerals or bar mitzvahs, no children's parties, no wedding anniversaries. And we've gone from that to working with the NHS via Virgin Bernardo's and the Oak Tree trustees to offer NHS services from the Oak Tree Centre on an ongoing basis. mainly midwifery, pre and postnatal care, with the working with all the other agencies. So that's been a real steep learning curve for us, but we made it happen. And this is what's happened. Things have been made to happen, which we wouldn't normally even consider. And the leader of the council mentions the food bank. We've been able to register the Oak Tree Centre with the food bank to offer practical help via the trustees and Councillor Chura and myself. So we've learned an awful lot, and as has already been said, let's not lose what we've learned. Let's hang on to the positives. There have been negatives, but let's hang on to the more positive aspect. And congratulations all around to everybody who's been part of this. It's been really heartening and good to see as Colchester pulls together bit by bit across Colchester, all the little bits making one big success. So congratulations to everybody who's involved in the community and our employees and our officers, and particularly the writer of this report, which I found very straightforward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Huff. Councillor McCarthy, do you have any questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. No questions from me, and I think everything that I was going to say has been echoed previously because I'm the 6th councillor to be called on the roll. So basically, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone. Thank you, Mark, for the report as well. And I agree with Councillor Hayter. Communication to councillors was excellent, and being able to share that with our residents gave them peace of mind. And I think what we've done as a council has been really, really reassuring for everyone. And I think most people have seen that. And the cooperation across party lines, it was never going to work unless everyone was involved, and I'm really pleased, and there's a lot we can take forward and learn from. So yeah, thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Whitehead, do you have any questions, please?
Yeah, a couple of questions for me. First, around the rough sleeper thing, but before that, like everyone else, echo everyone else's comments. Massive well done to everybody involved in the response. It's been really impressive and fantastic seeing everyone pulling together and doing such a great job. Around the rough sleeping side of things, I guess one of the interesting things in the report is that the number of people we ended up housing exceeded our expectations at the outset quite significantly, and I wonder if we think that's evidence of a kind of hidden problem of sofa surfing, and that perhaps there are more people in our borough in need than maybe we've been aware of, and that might be part of the issue. And then also on the other side of it, it's been very successful, really wonderful initiative, really. And I wonder what we think we can learn from this approach. We've obviously been told for a long time that homelessness is this problem that it's near impossible to solve and you can't really do much about it. But the fact that we've got all these people off the street, are there things that we can learn from that proactive approach of putting people into housing in the first instance, and about our working with partnerships as well, and the way that they've contributed to the success of that scheme?
Chair, I can take part of this and ask if Adam Fox, Councillor Fox, can be ready to maybe add some more. So thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I do think it shows that although we've been successful in getting pots of government money, and locally we have been very supportive of our homeless and worked again with a number of partners to support people into accommodation and away from certain addiction, or to help with their issues that they have that brought them to the streets. But however, I do think it's a national issue, homelessness, whether that be tackling housing as a national issue or tackling mental health and the reasons for people ending up in homelessness. Lots of different reasons why, but actually getting the national backing. The government did inject more money in because they understood the severity of leaving people out on the streets during a pandemic. That meant that we were able to have the confidence to act quickly and to use that support from government. So we did, and we also had the opportunity, as we are renovating Elfrida House, that we had some accommodation which we could use in this temporary fashion. But I think Councillor Dundas mentioned the government, first of all, were quite sort of strict, saying that we'll give you some money, but then I heard from a minister, don't gold plate the service, don't sort of give them anything too good, because, so I won't carry on repeating that because it's quite saddening, but the government have then stepped up and realised they can't just cut off the support immediately. So hopefully we are going to be able to work on a longer term solution. However, Adam will probably explain that Alfreda House does need to be regenerated into the accommodation fit for purpose that we are planning for the old elderly accommodation that it is. But we do have good strategies in place. Previously, government have backed us because of our good work on homelessness. But I would say in light of your first point, you are correct that it did highlight that more hidden homelessness of sofa surfing, that people temporarily stay with friends or family. And we do need to ensure that we've got better either temporary accommodation or permanent accommodation. And I think you would agree with me that we need to build more housing that is affordable for rent, that is council owned. And I know that Adam can update you on Amphora projects where we continue to build housing that will be 30% affordable housing built in. So over to Adam, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think you've raised some really good questions there, Lorcan. And I think that, so initially when we when we had the call for everybody in, I think the teams worked absolutely astoundingly well to ensure that that happened. And you're right that there clearly is that additional level of hidden homelessness. I don't think it's that we're not aware of it, but I think that it does often go under the radar. And I think that if you talk to any of the services involved, there is also an issue quite often where some of those who are rough sleeping will find some temporary respite with a friend or a family member sleeping on a sofa or sleeping in a spare room. And I think that clearly what happened was that I think a number of factors led to people seeking that additional support from the council, whether it was the fact that that support in somebody's house was considered to be short term, or whether there were people who were concerned about isolating with others in that initial period too. And I definitely think that there are things that we can learn from this particular situation. I think what's also clear was that at the start of this, we were assured by government that we would be back to the hilt, and we would get absolutely 100% backing to support those people coming in off the streets. I think what's become clear is that central government it's dawning on them just exactly the level of support that local authorities need from central government in terms of financing, and I'm sure that Councillor King will talk about that later in the response to the budget. And I think in terms of some of the wider issues, I think that supply and affordability still remain the two absolute fundamentals to solving the problem long term. And there have been some interesting announcements from the government in the last week or so about how they feel that we can that they can help us to deliver that. And I'm hopeful that Colchester is going to be one of those at the forefront of that support. We've been backed well by the ministry over recent years in our response to rough sleeping and homelessness, and I'd hope that we'll be at the forefront of that too. I think equally we were very fortunate locally that we were able to lean on Alfreda House, where we had clearly been starting to reduce the numbers there, and CBH had done a fantastic job with that, and we were also able to make use of some hotel accommodation too. And that's not always available in the normal circumstances, and I think that that's one of the challenges. So what Councillor Corey said about that temporary accommodation as well, I think is important. But I would like to put on record my thanks to all those CBH staff and all those staff in partner agencies and in so many of the charity and voluntary groups who really supported us in this work.
Thank you, Councillor Fox, for that. Right, I have got a couple of questions here. I mean, one of them has been touched on before, but I think I'd just like to look at this a little bit more depth, please. Paragraph 510, I can't see the page number, unfortunately, because my iPad won't let me see the page number. Paragraph 510 of item 12. I'm just a bit concerned that the reasons given for reducing the frequency of the recycling collections were given as the need for social distancing. Now, the service was in fact suspended and there's no mention of that in that paragraph. I feel that as this report is an absolute reflection of what has happened during the time of this crisis, I do feel that it should be reflected in there, just to say that as of the 24th of March, or between the 24th of March, 14th of April, some services were suspended. However, and this was basically because there were 57 staff members down, was one of the reasons. 47% of staff members were isolating, they were self-isolating, they were looking after other people, various reasons for that. Plus, of course, we had to look after the staff that were there and working. But I do feel that in that paragraph, that should be touched on because there's no mention of it. And if a year, 2 years down the line, something else happens, we know that this could potentially be a peaks and troughs situation. We could have to go right back to there. And I think it's really important that all of the decisions that were taken are shown in this report. So I wonder whether that could be looked at, please.
Councillor Bentley, Councillor Beverly Davis. I do understand what you have to say there. In 5.10, it does say government guidance on workplace social distancing has required the avoidance of crowding and minimising of opportunities for the virus to spread, maintaining a distance of 2 metres between individuals. This was not possible with a fully manned refuse collection vehicle, which requires 2 or 3 loaders, etc. So there is a bit of that, but I think you're right in order to explain fully. But at the same time, we've got to balance off with the brevity of report. I'm not sure, scanning through, if one of the officers can tell me whether in the appendix it does explain more about the waste. I don't know if, again, Dan Gaspar.
Dan's raised his hand. I shall
okay, thank you.
In a second. Dan, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to say that it is captured in the list of decisions and other actions taken, so on at the top of page 54, which is one of the appendices. It says there from 25th of March, recycling suspended, including garden waste services. So it is there in the record. I mean, Councillor Corey's right. The report is not intending to kind of go through all of that detail, but yeah, you could make that recommendation if you want to. For
yeah, I think I would be happier as it goes, as the report itself is so clear on so many things. It's a really good report, but I do feel that little bit is just missing. And I think for the lessons learned, for when we're looking back on this situation, I think we need to reflect everything that's happened. And it doesn't need to be a huge piece in there, just a couple of lines either in 510 or add another paragraph in there just to say, and this had to happen because just to acknowledge that it did actually happen. I would like to put that forward as a recommendation that we recommend to Cabinet. I will go through that at the end. There was another one which was general emergency powers. That's mentioned in there in the report, but there is no explanation of what that is. Is there any way we could have either included within there as an extra appendix and an explanation of what the general emergency powers are. Is there political input into those decisions? And again, this goes back to something that Councillor Bentley asked, a log published of the decisions taken. That's what I've mentioned here, what decisions were actually taken by who and for what reasons. So that would feed into that. But yeah, just an explanation of the general emergency powers I think would be useful.
Can I pick up that, please?
Sure. I'll just say before you do, Adrian, that I accept that'd be a good explanation for people to understand what happened in the time. I do think the appendix is really clear, but we could add more information as Councillor Bentley first suggested. But Adrian Pritchard.
Chair, I was only going to say that we did explain quite clearly to all 51 councillors the emergency powers that were used. Happily pick that up. It was a very clear explanation to all 51 councillors in one of the bulletins. If the panel feel that should be explicitly shown in the report, very happy for us to do that or add it as an appendices so everybody's very clear about it. It's absolutely fine. And in terms of the table, I think that the appendix is pretty comprehensive. If I'm honest, I doubt I'll find another organisation that has that list of detail in there. But picking up Councillor Bentley's point, we will go back through and we will start to add in even more information and detail about certain decisions. Quite happy to again do that.
Thank you. Right, that's all that I had. I can see Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just one other one I wanted to ask about. I mean, Colchester Borough Council, along with other councils, have been on the front line of delivering the response to the situation over the last couple of months, and obviously developing a lot of knowledge and understanding and expertise in relation to this very kind of specific situation that we've all been faced with. And I'm just wondering, as we're heading into a different period now, where the lockdown is going to be eased a bit, and activities are going to be allowed, and it's going to be quite different. I just wonder if we've got any concerns as an organisation about some of the potential challenges of dealing with that, and about the capacity that we have in order to take those on at all.
Thank you. I think some of that will come up in the financial paper that Councillor King will present to you shortly. And we will be working on a recovery paper. We've got a recovery paper that will come to you soon that explains some of that. I mean, I would put on record now that I am concerned about the easing of lockdown too quickly by the government. I teach only part-time, but I'm concerned about the motivations of having students going back to school. I think that's more to protect the economy rather than protecting our youngsters. So there's a number of things that I'm concerned about in the wider picture. When it comes to us, we've got a number of steps that we are looking at taking in terms of service, scaling up, backup of every service, and making sure we only do it in a safe way, but also in terms of working with business in the high street and across the town centre and across the borough in terms of reopening in line with government guidance. Again, with that slight caution that I have, and I will definitely, I think, share with other cabinet members that caution. And I know Councillor King will explain some of the business side when talking through his report soon. So there are things that we will learn, and I hope that there was a national call today that I was listening to where a key representative who advises government on town centres and business was saying that he feels that attitudes would change. I hope they do. I do think sort of we respect the environment more now that we see what less pollution can do, and when we see wildlife strolling into our estates, that we can learn from some of those changes. And actually Councillor Bentley and I and some of my cabinet will be meeting tomorrow, and group leaders as well, to talk about the sort of transport environment and how to ensure more sustainable travel out of the COVID crisis, because we are all using, we're travelling less, but actually to use sustainable transport going forward, to prioritise cycling and walking would be an absolute silver lining to this crisis I would like to see. But there's many other ways in which we can learn from this, Councillor Whitehead, that will be hopefully gone through in our recovery paper and informed by the leaders recovery group that we're having cross-party fortnightly now, and we had weekly up until now.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley, please.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I just want to just embellish slightly on this, what I was asking for, what you've picked up on as well, Chair. And there's no question, it's a very comprehensive list. It's sort of a list of events, and what I'm looking for is actually a list of decisions, who took them, when they were made, and for what reason. I think it's very simple. It doesn't need to be very complicated, very simple. And the reason for that, there's no question that all the councillors, 51 councillors, have been brilliantly informed, but part of scrutiny is to protect the public on information, and it's the public that I think need to see this as well. So we are their representatives. There's no harm in doing that. And if we've gone above and beyond any other local authority, I say that's great. Let's keep going.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up very, very briefly in your comment regarding paragraph 510, which is on page 37, I think. Yeah, I mean, I've got absolutely no issue at all, like you, with what is in 510. What's written there was one of the reasons given in the original paper. But if we go back to the paper we had on the reasons for suspension, obviously the staff absences were an issue. You cannot, for good reason, I'm not saying there's any particular, the reasons for it. You cannot have, if you have 47% of your staff absent, it's going to affect your service. It's ridiculous to suggest it won't, and it would be utterly unreasonable for us to argue that it wouldn't. So I think that paragraph just needs to match what went in the original document everybody saw. It just needs an extra sentence in there. You don't need to take anything out. What's written is perfectly fact. But the two reasons were the social distancing and the fact that we had nearly half our staff missing for a variety of reasons. They were vulnerable, self-shielding, but self-isolating, various things. But it just needs a sentence in there. That's all it needs.
Thank you. Haven't got any more hands raised now. So those.
Councillor King can't raise his. I raised mine in order to say that he needs to raise his.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Madam Chair, thank you. I've so missed scrutiny. I just had to come before you and speak again. Very briefly, 2 points picking up on the recent conversation. And I think for those listening who might have the impression that lots of Colchester Borough Council staff just haven't been able to come into work, haven't been off sick or otherwise, just very briefly, some stats might just give a bit of context for some of the numbers that we've been talking about. Undoubtedly, there has been the problem that's been described, and it's had the effects been described. But the latest data I've just seen says that we've got a total absence of just over 9% of the workforce, which includes coronavirus cases, which I'm pleased to say are currently 0. Other sickness cases, just 16. And then self-isolation for all the reasons we know, which applies to every workforce, of some 64 cases. So we've got 80 odd staff absent as of the 1st of June. And that's a number that's continued to come down. So for me, it's just a bit of context that's perhaps useful to everybody. Our staff have been what you and others have described, really anxious to serve the public, and sometimes there's a huge stress that goes in wanting to serve the public and actually not being able to do it for all the reasons we touched on in talking about furlough. But so some numbers there to give a bit of context. Mostly our workforce has been available, thank goodness, and coronavirus penetration has been, thankfully, at least in terms of known cases, low. The other point, Madam Chair, if I may, goes back to the issue that the leader and Councillor Auckland talked about, which was the town centre and readiness and safety. Just want to sort of say, having sat in there alongside officers or not, with what I've described to all councillors as the task force, and seen that in its layers, there has been a lot of really good work across the town centre between businesses with the council, and in turn with, I know county are in this loop as well, as they have to be, because we're talking about shared space, public realm, highways, licensing permits, the whole bag. But the inside the stores and the outside the stores, the conversations around how to deliver a safe environment that's alive to the guidance and the regulation, for me, it's been good quality, and we'll only find out when it's tested. But there's absolutely no question that the importance for confidence and for business resumption in a sustained way, we can take some confidence from what work we can see, and we as a council, our officers are playing a very full part in that. So I'd like to give some assurance they really do get it, the need to deliver a safe environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. There's another thing I wanted to mention, actually, which was the full council meeting in July. It has been mentioned. I've had a quick scan through. I think it was on this report, but I think it's been mentioned that the full council meeting in July will just be a quorum meeting. I'm not sure that that's actually relevant. I think there's a lot of things that we need to talk about at the July meeting, and I think it should be a full council meeting. And I think, you know, most people now have access to Zoom, or, you know, they've all got internet access. And I feel that we should actually call the council meeting in July should be a full council meeting. I have both Councillor Corey and Adrian Pritchard wishing to speak on this. Who wants to go first?
I'll say a bit and then pass to Adrian, but I think we do have to be careful. That's the main reason why we're taking a cautious approach, is because if you read the regulations and the rules, if all 51 are to attend but then are unable to connect for some reason or another, that could invalidate the whole meeting. So we need to be cautious about how we go forward and make sure everyone can attend. They have the internet capability, they have the sound, excuse me, they have the sound, because if the video goes, you can continue with audio. But I will pass to the Chief Executive, as he may want to explain more about the rules.
Chair, no, I wasn't going to explain the rules really. I was just going to explain the decision, which is we are looking to have a full council meeting with all 51 councillors. However, we put in there that should that not be possible through skills, technology, internet connection and the like, then we would revert back to the plan that we put in the report, or wherever you've read it, Madam Chairman. So we're very clear. We're looking for a full council meeting with all 51 councillors.
Excellent.
It was just making sure we didn't raise expectations and then we couldn't deliver all of them. That was all.
Okay, that's really good. I'm really pleased to hear that. In that case, I will scrub that one out of my proposals. Thank you. So from this, I've got four proposals to put forward to Cabinet on Wednesday. If there's anyone that's got anything different, then please let me know. What I'll do is I'll just very quickly run through them very briefly, and then I will ask each of you to vote on them. You can vote on them en bloc, or you can let me know if there's any one of those that you don't agree with. So we've got, firstly, there is a full, to be a full log published of CBC decisions taken and by who. Then number 2 is to reword or add a line in to mention to 5.10 to mention the suspension of recycling service and the reasons. 3, that there is an explanation of the general emergency powers as an appendix. And 4, something that I haven't talked about yet, but something that I'm taking from everybody else and something that I actually already had written down anyway to mention, was a vote of thanks to all staff from the scrutiny panel. I would like to know if staff are actually how staff are being made to feel that their work is appreciated. They are the council's biggest assets, and they need to be appreciated for the enormous amount of work they've done. And I think we can just give a very, very small nod to them by giving them a vote of thanks from the scrutiny panel. So there's 4 items there. If I go through in turn the members of the panel, if you could please indicate your agreement or otherwise with those 4 items, please. Councillor Bentley.
Agreed on all 4. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Agreed all 4.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Yes, agree on all 4.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Agreed all 4, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed all 4.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whitehead.
Agreed all 4.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
So, Chairman, that's a unanimous verdict.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was a good debate there. Well, not debate, but a discussion. I think it's probably a good time to have a very brief break now. And can we say, what, 5 minutes? Is that all people need? Do we just make a cup of tea, or 5-10 minutes?
Can't walk the dog.
Yes, so we advise members if you could shut down your video feed for the 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's have a quick.
I have very noisy helicopters. I think they're trying to get in the house.
Yeah, I've got the same over my side now.
That'll be the army.
It is indeed.
Yes. Got everyone back that we need.
So we're just waiting for Councillor Whitehead.
We are. Okay, on to item 13. The COVID-19 budget changes 2021 and budget strategy 21-22. We have Councillor Lewis Barber, who wants to have your say on this one. Councillor Barber, welcome.
Hello. How are you doing?
Okay, thank you. You're untimed on this.
Lovely. Do I start now? Am I okay to go?
Yes, Councillor. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, committee. I just wanted to raise this evening about North Essex Garden Community Limited because of its reference in this item of the agenda and the process going forward. In particular, any monies we are owed or any money we owe NEGC as an authority, and just to gain some clarity on that. In particular, in relation to the shareholder agreement and the impact of that on our decision making as a local authority going forward too, because my group has publicly stated that we would like to see NEGC Limited wound up, closed down, following the decision of the inspector's letter. I'm not aware of what the opinion may be across the broader chamber at all, but we had a majority in December against allocating further funds to NEGC, and I'm sure there'll be a breadth of opinion across all 51 councillors, assuming this item will come to full council. So I thought I'd just raise my particular issue with the opaqueness, I guess, of the shareholder agreement. I have read it before, and it is often made reference to the document about how we make decisions and our liabilities and what we have to do. But I certainly think there would be merit in having a discussion or sort of a summary viewpoint of key aspects of the shareholder agreement, so we know as members how we can take appropriate decisions going forward, and perhaps the impact of any decisions we make on the local authority sort of as an entity. And I think that is very important for us to understand and be aware of, because sometimes when we've made reference to the shareholder agreement from when I've read it in the past, I didn't see any clauses that sort of cross-reference with what was implied in some of the papers. So not saying it's wrong, but I just think that there needs to be some more clarity and understanding, so we know best what we can do as an authority going forward, and understand the exact implications of the decision to put £350,000 into NEGC. I mean, to be frank, the demolition that the inspector gave to the work of NEGC, I certainly don't think it merits further funding. It was disappointing for advocates of NEGC, I'm sure to say, in the least. So I do think we need a sort of a better direction of where we're going with NEGC, and that really starts here this evening, because we're talking about giving more finances to this organisation, when really more than ever, and it's something my group and others have argued for a long time, that what's the direction of it now? What are we going to do with it? And actually, what are the implications of decisions we're making over the next few months on us as an authority and our liability and duties to both the organisation and our partners? And I think that really needs to be made crystal clear, and we all have an understanding of the shareholder agreement before we make a decision. And I think there was a question in there, but hopefully you got the gist of what I was asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Councillor King?
Oh, Councillor King, you're on mute at the moment.
Power of mute.
Yes, desperately trying to unmute. Thank you, Councillor Barber, for the question. It'd be fair to say that we have touched on this ground before, but I'm very happy to sort of walk through this now. The way I look at this is a sort of parallel path. The four authorities, with the blessing of government, decided to set off on this course of action. They did so for some excellent reasons. Let's just remind ourselves, we have a legal duty to cooperate with the neighbouring local authorities. It makes sense if you're going to build infrastructure or seek to attract investment for infrastructure. And if you seek to build at scale, for the reasons that led most councillors here and elsewhere to say, we are in favour of garden community principles, the difficulty we have is the scale of those developments, where they are, and so on, and whether or not they can be realised in the to the way it's been described. So we need to go back, and I'm relatively new to this, but I go back and say, we started off together. We agreed to do what's required of us. We formed a way ahead, and that's reflected in the shareholder agreement. I've had a look at it recently. It looks a fairly standard document for me. I'm very happy to have another look, share it again. It's in that sense not opaque because you yourself have seen it, but I think it is right to say it hasn't been something we've talked about, and perhaps we should have done collectively at the same time we were having a conversation around whether or not a given sum of money would go through to NEGC itself. So I think there is something of an understanding gap. There is an obligation that's, in my view, implicit, explicit. If you're a shareholder, it's in the best sense of the terms, it's a joint venture, and away you head, and you're going to take it through to the point at which you have a happy transition or something else, and perhaps it might yet be something else, but either way, you continue together, you're bound together, and you take that rough, that smooth, and you divvy up the cost and the bill. So I think that's shared ground, and as I say, you yourself have seen the shareholder agreement. It's, in my view, unexceptional, but I'll have a look at what I could do to circulate it with some kind of useful, highlight summary. But the heart of your question isn't that, if I hear you correctly. It's really what's going to happen next. I expect a parallel path, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. On the one track, we have, as authorised by the local planning committee, asked the inspector for his modifications. We have to receive those, and then we have to go through a process which others know better than I of consultation, and then we have the choice that is set out for us as a council. I know what I hear. It seems to me perhaps the majority view is minded, we'll see, to go with the local plan with those modifications with that one garden community. If that's so no disrespect for any who disagree with that will be the conclusion reached. If that's so, we will be back round the full circle. We will still have a duty to cooperate. We will have the logic of needing to work with tendering, because the tendering Colchester Border Garden Community, and because it involves infrastructure and the big picture, it will, I think, include both Braintree, or could do, hope it will, and Essex County Council. So the parties are still going to be bound together. But I absolutely agree that whether or not it's NEGC as presently formed or some other variant is absolutely the conversation that's got to be had. And so that's the second parallel path. So whilst we request, we await, and we proceed towards an agreement on the local plan, which we have to do one way or another. On the other, the councils, NEGC Limited, as an organisation with its directors representing the interests of those councils, have to come to a view about what they do with what they've got, whatever they may think of that, good or not so good, whoever they may point the finger at or not, they've got to come to a view how they're going to cooperate in the future. And Lewis, they will be back round to the reality of having to have some form of agreement to yoke themselves in. So that process, which will take, well, it's going to take some months in its total, will give time for everybody to have a conversation around what they think those next steps should be. I expect change, but what that change is, scope, vehicle, that's all the conversation that lies ahead. And I'm sort of mindful that those good people who, whether we think that it was a complete failure or a partial success, depends on your standpoint. You know, I'll just point out to colleagues, to a £2.5 billion Garden community and £100 million infrastructure investment. It's not what was proposed, it's not what was sought. I get all of that, but it's still very significant, particularly in the tough times that we are in. Now, I'm not making a case for anything. I'm just saying I think there's huge practicalities here. If that course of action and that direction is to be followed through, we'll have to be bound together. We will work out what to do with what we have in terms of obligations, and we will have to, right to the beginning, pay our way as we go. And the last point for me, Councillor Lewis and Chair, is just this, which is it worth remembering, you know, that we're paying 1/8 of that bill under the way that this construct has come together. So when we talk about cost and waste, and I understand why, we just have to bear in mind that this is, from my perspective as a programme manager in past times, this is essential seed corn exploration and feasibility money. Absolutely does matter. These are big sums of money, but they are, however important they are, very small relative to the need and the prize.
Thank you. Councillor Barber, I assume you'll be staying to listen to the rest of the discussion.
Yes.
You don't have to.
I'll watch it on YouTube, playback.
Okay. Who's going to be introducing this item, please? Is it going to be Paul Cook or Councillor King?
Madam Chair, Paul and I worked this as a tag team, and we were with your agreement, we'll do the same again. So I've just got a few points to make at the beginning. I'll hand to Paul, and I have something more to add at the close, including if they've got through a couple of slides. So here's my brief starter for 10, knowing how much this will be enjoyed. 3 points. One's about scale, second's about judgment, and the third's about resilience and risk, Madam Chair. It's an extraordinary and a strange pleasure for somebody like me to be able to introduce the macroeconomic context for the nation to the Colchester Council budget. How often do you get to do that? And we do it for reasons that are worth saying very clearly to those who might be listening. It's what they know. We're in the early stages of an unprecedented health emergency, and we're actually at the beginning of an unprecedented economic emergency. And you can choose your parallels. We've offered one, Paul and I, in the paper, which is 300 years ago, but certainly most would accept you go back either to the Second World War or you go back to the pandemic of a century ago. Either way, we're at the very beginning. And what's unusual is not just the depth of what we face as challenge, recession or depression, but the pace at which it's happening. and the questions about the way in which we will return. So that leads us to the second question, second point I want to make, which is about judgment. There is a huge challenge for us, and as you would hope, through internal process, the senior management team, the budget group that draws people together, the recovery group which draws in colleagues from the opposition, and including conversations with Councillor Willits as well, which have been a good contribution and welcome. The challenge for estimation just really can't be overstated. So we've been up and down every angle on this. This reset, both in the budget and the strategy, is our current best assessment of connected challenges, for which there's no parallel, as I've said, but we've looked at income, cost, reserves, scope for transformation and change. We've also looked at how other councils are judging their challenge. And we've also looked back at 2008 and 9, what happened, and does that give us any lessons? And the answer is it only gives us a certain degree because, as just said, there is no exact parallel for this. So what we have done, however, and this gets to my third and last point before I hand to Paul, is we've looked with care at risk and scenario. So we really have done our very best to model both not all the streams of income, the possibilities for debt, but also the ways in which we might scope the challenge and sort of and address and beat it. So risk and resilience, as I say, my third point. So if I can, Madam Chair, and I'll come back at the close with the picture of what we will do after this, because there is one central point I hope we make between us, which is we are going to be going back to this, obviously sharing, explaining and testing, and I'm sure back to yourself in scrutiny, because of the uncertainties, the unpredictabilities, and that big picture, which is so rare to have such a dramatic, swift impact upon our fortunes. Paul, if I hand over to you, and if you could keep the mic open, please, Owen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I just run briefly through some of the report from section 6. These are very much initial figures, and as Councillor King was explaining, it's an emerging position. So we hope things turn out better financially than this, but we're taking a prudent approach at this stage. And we set out in 6.2 that Colchester is particularly reliant on fees and charges income and commercial rents in balancing its budget. And whilst that's been a strength in the past, in the current situation, we've been quite badly affected. So, for example, Leisure World, which generates a lot of income, is closed. There's quite a big impact on car parking. And though we're still collecting commercial rents, we can perhaps see that there is a risk over the months ahead that we may lose there. So because we rely quite significantly on income, we have potentially been quite badly hit. Then in the next part of 6, as Councillor King explains, we're just looking at the severity of the forecast downturn. And then if I go on to 6.9, we think the potential loss of income could be as high as 9.392 million in 2021. And we do have detailed forecasts that support this, and we keep working with service managers to update those. But they are based on a detailed assessment across all our main income sources. And then we also look at rates and council tax in 6.10. Business rates, although I think there may be some impact, we have gained in some ways because of the business rates reliefs being granted by the government, because that's meant that rather than collecting that business rate income, it will be paid directly to us as a Section 31 grant. Council tax, I have discussed a lot with the Assistant Director, Leonie Rathbone. She feels, although at the moment direct debits
are holding up well. It really takes about 3 months to judge the situation, because it's perhaps after it's been running for a while that we'd see the full impact. So we could have losses, but because of the collection fund system, they would impact in 21-22 rather than 2021. This is something we're having to watch very carefully on behalf of the county council as well, because as you'll be aware, only a small proportion of the council tax we collect is used by the district council. The greater part is used by the county council. Then we talk about the additional government funding in 612, and this is a moving position because since the report was prepared, we've had 173,000 towards restarting the high street, and we keep looking at that for any new announcements. 613, we identify we've applied for the furlough grants, and then we explain the grants that we've distributed, which has been a great effort again by customer services to pay out these grants. We've had support from the government to enhance the local council tax support scheme, but again, that could be a risk going forward because there'll be much higher take-up of the scheme potentially. And then we feel that at the moment on our forecast losses, particularly, on the income losses, the declared government support would only cover a proportion of the cost. And I don't think we're the only local authority that's making that point. So then that will affect the medium-term financial forecast. And in 7, we're looking at whether it would be possible to raise additional income, potentially by a new charge in 2021 or in 21-22. And we're also looking at the possibility in 7.2 that at the moment, the referendum limit for a council tax increase is 2.5% or £5 for a district authority. It may well be that government chooses to review that in next year's finance settlement as a way of funding the local authority additional costs. So we've made some assumptions there, but obviously that will become clearer as we go through the financial year. And then, given all the pressures which are summarised in the tables I'll come to at the end, that we think over the 2 years, 2021, 22, on our current forecasting, we might need to use 8.35 million of reserves, which is quite a significant proportion of our 19.2 million total. We feel that's a justified level, but I wouldn't like to see us going much further than that at this stage because we don't know the duration and the full impact of COVID-19. We have allowed some money in the revised MTFF for recovery programs in annual steps of 333,000 as set out in 9.2. And also that we're looking at reviewing the new strategic priorities to see how far those can be reprioritised towards recovery. And in 10.2, we set out on these assumptions what the budget hurdle might be next year, 3.1 million, which is an extremely challenging figure for an authority the size of Colchester that we may need to address. But as I say, that's our current forecast, and we greatly hope that that level might not be required. So in 11, we start looking at the budget strategy, some of the areas that might be examined to try and meet that gap, the timetable. NEGC in section 12, I think we've already discussed. Just in 14, we normally confidently expect to spend within budget, but we think in 1920, though we're still closing the accounts as I'm speaking, we think there might be an overspend of nearly 200,000 because of COVID-19 spending pressures, additional service costs. So risk is an important factor in all this because we have a detailed model behind this. As Councillor King was saying, we are constantly reviewing these assumptions and we would report back regularly on the emerging position. So then we come to the table in the appendix, which sets out in more detail the budget assumptions, which I hope is helpful. And I think, Chair, that's probably a reasonable run through the report, if that's helpful, and any questions welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that run through. It's certainly really helpful. One thing I will just ask very quickly before I go to others is you're saying there's a loss of income of 9.392 million. Is that just loss of income, or is that also additional costs? If it's only loss of income, what are the additional costs?
Thank you, Chair. So that is our forecast loss of income at this stage, but additional costs in some of the housing areas, and I could give a more detailed breakdown if that would be helpful by email, because we do make regular returns to MHCLG on the additional costs. I think that's probably about 500,000 in 2021.
Okay, I think it would be useful because it gives more of an overall figure of actually, it's not just loss of income, but it's extra cost, so it adds into that figure, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go through. I've been asked to do this in alphabetical order, but if you'd like me to change it around at any time, please just say, although I might lose where I am. I will start with Councillor Bentley, please. Do you have any comments and questions for this item?
Just a couple, thank you. And I have to say, what a very good report in what is the most challenging job now in local government, in finances, because we are now making it up, aren't we? We're guessing, we don't know, and this is why it's so difficult. And I think this is a brilliant report and well put together, both looking at the national macro scene, but also the local scene as well. So you are to be congratulated, Mr. Cook, and also Councillor King as well, on producing such a paper, and all your staff as well. Just a few comments around this. And again, I'm going to have to ask you to theorise a little bit, because we just don't know some of these answers, but your best guess, I suppose. The first thing is around council tax. Obviously, we have to forecast, and in the first couple of months, it looks like it's not been too bad. I believe it's something like a 5% across the county drop off. But like anything else, you said 3 months. I suspect the real difficulties, well, we've had some businesses immediately fall off a cliff. The real difficulties are coming in the future months with companies as they start to run out of orders, who've been okay at the start, not so okay as we carry on. And of course, within that, with any business, there are people whose jobs are seriously at risk. And I just wondered, have you done a series of forecasts on dropping off with council tax? Bearing in mind, you're quite right, the county council, for all its adult social care needs and everything else, takes the larger share. But have we done a scenario of the worst case scenarios going forward? My first question. And my second question, my final question as well, because I don't want to hog this too long. I just wondered how long our museum services and leisure services can cope without income. So they're businesses in their own right, aren't they? And so therefore we've got the castle, the museums, we've got the leisure world. How long they can cope being mothballed before it starts becoming a real problem for us to maintain them?
Shall I start us off, Paul, and just make the point I made earlier, which is that from the very beginning, and thank you for your remarks. And as you say, well, it's quite interesting adding numbers up as you fall off a cliff, because that in a way is what we're doing, and we're looking downwards to see where we might bounce back up to, and that's both national and locally true. That's true for every service, including the museum service. And just glancing at Paul's numbers again, which we've been through, I'm kind of encouraged that each one of the services sees it differently. So there's no one view here. We're expecting that over each of the quarters there will be an increase in income. Sorry about that. Income, time course, income, and a return towards normality. But we're still assuming a problem beyond a year. How long they will be able to manage that gets us back into service transformation and some of the other conversations around how, with partners, you can continue to do what you do in the way that provides a quality of service and is still affordable. But I'm going to hand over back to Paul, apart from just reiterating again, everything we've done has been on the basis of differences in scenario. So the whole of the picture has been based on assumptions that income will be less or greater than we see here. And Paul, could you perhaps talk to what you were sharing with me today when you did some cross analysis of our positioning relative to other councils, because that might perhaps give a certain degree of comfort.
Thank you, Councillor King. Yes, there is a very exciting association called the Essex Finance Officers Association, which is all the Section 151 officers of the Essex local authorities. So that is actually meeting twice weekly now to look at some of these forecasts and share results across the authorities. So, I mean, I think it's just one, as Councillor Bentley says, we need to watch carefully, because we don't think it's necessarily the first 2 months that will tell us what the true council tax position is. And there's quite a lot of income coming into the collection fund. So, you know, quite small variations can make an impact on income generally, and the, you know, something like the museums service. What we're forecasting at the moment is that from Q2, there would be a sort of gradual return to a normal income level, but we're not sure that we'd even achieve that by the end of the financial year. So what we're doing now, every month we have financial monitoring in detail with cost centre managers, and we're looking very, very carefully at the income actuals to see what happens. So, for example, we're just about to do month 2 now. We're working on it as of now, and we will look at that very carefully. As Councillor King says, you know, each service has forecast a slightly different profile. So I think it's one, you know, we will need to keep working on and updating councillors as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you. Did that answer the question about how long services can survive with no income?
So thank you for the answer. And I'm asking impossible questions. I understand that. I just wondered, do we have a sense, though, if in a year from now we still do not have people going into our museums or our leisure world, what happens to the physical asset? I mean, if you can't answer it, I understand that. But are we looking at that? Because they are buildings that need repair, dilapidation and repairs. So have we forecast what that looks like if there is no income coming in?
Well, I'll start us off. Dan Gascoigne is on the line, and Dan may have a perspective to add to this. What I do know from having talked to some in that area is absolutely they want to get back and open. So just start with that. They have to, and the impossible equation, as you understand it, Kevin, they have to work within the guidance. So what they've been doing is looking at what can they do, what can they open up first, and what could follow. But and it varies site by site. We know that that's going to be both complicated. It's going to constrain, as it will with every other business, volume. Therefore, it's going to constrain income. And then there's the big if, which is if the public trusts the general wider reopening of services, including all forms of entertainment, including the museum service and leisure world and so on, and are then prepared, even if the capacity is there, to walk through. That is very difficult to tell. We're going to have to work it month on month. But I go back to what I said before, and I'll hand to Dan. We will have to be fleet of foot. It's one of the big things for us to sort of be saying to each other and to others, which is we're going to have to look, and Dan's leading on this with his colleagues, how do we do our business differently when our income position is so different? And of course, where is income, both short and longer term, most under threat? We have to respond to that. So I don't want to say in a specific way, but the logic is plain. We would look at staffing levels, would we not, in the round, and we would look at where they're strongest in relationship to meeting demand, and where demand is less, we'd have to sort of look at that. We'd have to look to that personnel and people equation. So there's no one answer, because I expect, and I'll hand to Dan, that there will be a process of review and adapt in the round, and also service by service and part of it as we work through the next few months. And one last thing, go back to the conversation around the business improvement district and the importance they see, we share, that whatever happens in terms of launch, which will be different by each part of the local economy, doing it well and having consumer confidence built up rather than damaged is going to be integral, and that's very hard to judge. Dan, would you like to offer a view?
Through you, Chair, I would echo certainly what Councillor King's said in terms of the context here. Clearly, just going back to Councillor Bentley's question, we have from the outset been modelling a range of scenarios, from a sort of potentially optimistic, favourable scenario through to a much more adverse one, and we've refined those models. Paul and I working very closely with his team, business partners and the senior management team, and indeed with cabinet members to look at those scenarios pretty frequently over the last few months during this crisis. So the scenario that is played out in the numbers in this report very much reflects our best estimate of the likely scenario we think mapping out over time, and we refine it all the time. A new piece of government guidance comes out. We refine it and we look at the numbers again. I mean, just today we were having a conversation about Cultural Leisure World, for example, in relation to the recent announcements that there might be some guidance coming out about reopening of swimming pools. So we take that, work with the service, think about the likelihood of that happening, what it might mean for our services, because it isn't simply a case of, swimming pools might be open, therefore income's back up to 100%. Clearly, as Paul said before, the rate at which income recovers is not something anyone can fully predict with accuracy, because it relies on consumer behaviour. Now, the services you mentioned, museums, Leisure World, well, our scenario, as Paul said, assumes that income will start to recover from this quarter onwards. We don't expect it to recover to 100% of previous levels by the year end. But we hope that going into the next financial year, we'll see that recovery happen. Now, there might be structural impacts from the downturn, for example, on commercial rents that we can't yet understand as well. So there's other losses there, and obviously car parking is another big area of income, which we probably will expect to come back sooner once shops reopen. So from mid-June onwards, again, as Paul said, just monitoring all of these lines of the budget constantly, really, to ensure that we are matching our forecasts against actuals all the time. I don't think it's possible to say, a length of time for which any one service can survive. The museums and Leisure World and other income earning services contribute to the overall revenue budget position. Those services in normal times provide a net income. Some provide a greater surplus than others. And we will keep monitoring the costs. Clearly, if the situation were to deteriorate further, if there were a second wave, for some other reason our income forecast needed to be adjusted downwards, then we would be again having serious discussions about what that means for services. And as it stands, whilst we can meet the in-year deficit through use of reserves and balances going into next year, as has been said and as it says in the report, that leaves us with a considerable budgetary challenge, which we are already actively planning for, alongside the recovery work that was alluded to in the previous item.
So can I say thank you? Look, I'm asking you the impossible questions, and I think the answers actually reflect that, and you're actually doing the best you can. And I think the scenario planning is correct. I just wondered, finally, Madam Chairman, whether we could ask for a bit of pre-scrutiny on some of that scenario planning. I think it's very optimistic to think we could start recovering on income by the end of this quarter or beginning of next, if I'm being brutally honest about it. Let's hope I'm wrong. But I think we should look at some of the scrutiny, look at some of the scenario planning and do a bit of pre-scrutiny to help with this, because this is about all of our assets. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just to put it into context, I hope Dan won't mind. He knows this stuff so well, but I've got the numbers right alongside me. When we say recover, we are talking about like that. It's a long, slow curve. So I think I glanced at museums end of second quarter. These numbers, Paul, you may have changed again since I last saw them, but it's 21%. So no proportion. when we say we expect to recover, it's because that's what we do, but we're being cautious about it. We're expecting through the whole of the financial year that we're going to be either completely under or well under and slowly recovering. So it's a quarter by quarter piece. We could perhaps share that on another occasion to make that bit plainer, but this is pretty cautious baby steps that we're assuming are possible. And I think that feels right to me. Alive to capacity is going to be, as we know, more nationally constrained by some form of social distancing, well, until government tell us otherwise.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bourne, did you have any questions, please?
Yes, I do. Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I do appreciate that when you're getting towards the end of a municipal year and you want to tie up your budgets, it must be extremely frustrating to have to look at reprofiling the budgets that you worked so hard on for the past year. So thank you very much to Paul and his team for trying to get us to a place of, well, it's a bit more than sticking your finger in the air and testing the wind, isn't it? But all local authorities are in the same boat at the moment. I've got a couple of questions, and I wondered, is there anything about Colchester Borough that puts us particularly at risk financially, or even at an advantage financially than other local authorities, apart from the obvious that we don't own an airport? And my second query is around co-production. Now, we've seen in the previous report a lot about how working with partners has really helped the response effort. It's really enabled us to make an improvement to what was already happening, but to design totally new services with other organisations. And apart from just doing a very basic survey of residents, is there any way that we have thought about co-production of services by including members, staff and the residents of Colchester in order to just, we've had to shake things up so much now. I don't want us to lose the opportunity for co-production to help us with our financial situation.
Madam Chair, if I could start us off and pass to my colleagues, if that's okay. We've all got fragments that some might think of wisdom, we're not sure. Maybe they'll be helpful. I think from my perspective, and perhaps I might go to Dan next, this is so deeply into the pleasure of looking at service delivery with colleagues. I think from my perspective, absolutely we want to do that. My only, cabinet focused hesitation would be, not that we don't do it, but we keep ourselves very sober about the limitations of that, because we still have service obligations in the short and the immediate term. And we also have to ensure that we very swiftly move to balance the book. So all that profiling work and everything else. But we are, if you go back to the conversation earlier this evening, of course, flagging exactly what we want to do, which is to work with partners, to look at what we can do to make more effective use of our procurement locally, so local buy and local partner, and our recovery plan, including also the town deal, if that, as we hope, still is there for us to pursue. Absolutely assumes a focus on recovery and a focus on the sum of our efforts. But that's just my take. Dan, would you or Paul pick up?
Yeah, I mean, on the co-production point, I think as we've heard in the previous item, the current crisis and the experience that the council's had for many years before that has shown how strong the partnerships are between statutory agencies, between us and the voluntary sector, but also with communities, and community groups have really been outstanding through this crisis, and we would be crazy not to draw on their expertise about their local places in shaping services in the future within the constraints of the budgetary position. So I would say, absolutely that will be a part of the work we do to both kind of recover existing services, recover the economy of Colchester, but also think about how we reshape services to deal with the budget pressures that we've got. So yeah, I think that's really, really important. In terms of particularly at risk or not, I mean, we heard in the presentation that the council is reliant on income, but then all councils are. I think we've as a council have been very successful in securing other income sources, and that has enabled the council to protect a number of services, perhaps more than other councils have done over recent years. So some of the difficult decisions that other places have had to take haven't been taken in Colchester because of the good work that's been done. So I think we are in a position of strength. I think that as a council, we can draw on that to help reshape services going forward and identify creative ways of delivering services, creative ways of reducing costs, and creative ways of securing additional income that will help secure and sustain services in the future. So, you know, that for me is sort of where we're coming from. Others will know better than me about the sort of structural issues with the economy in Colchester or in the region. But I think we are in a strong position as a council, but we have a difficult job to do.
Thank you. Has that answered your question, Tina? Thank you. Councillor Dundas, please, did you have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a few comments and questions. Firstly, I'll just echo everybody else in saying well done on all the work you've done. It must have been very, very difficult in difficult circumstances, under a lot of pressure. And I think both officers and councillors as well, particularly Councillor King, I think you've delivered a lot quite quickly. There are lots of analogies we could use for describing making assumptions. I think Councillor Bourne said finger in the air. I was going to use nailing jelly to the wall. There are lots. They are all assumptions. This will not play out exactly as this. Whichever direction it goes in, it won't play out exactly as this, and we all know that. But I do appreciate you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And it may well be things are a lot better than we think at the moment as time develops. We can but hope. But I think planning for the worst is the right way to go. I see the new budget. That I think it's a service transformation. It's a wonderful political expression, but we know what it means in reality. We know it means spending cuts and price rises. So you've got a tough job over the next few months, and I do really realise that, and you have my sympathy in many respects. You know, it's difficult. I don't want to go into sort of demand elasticity curves and Lassiter curves and economic things like that. But as we know, particularly if you're talking about service charges, it's very difficult because putting the price up for something doesn't necessarily mean more revenue. There is a limit that actually you lose revenue. Sometimes the only way to get more revenue is cut prices. Ironically, there is a sweet spot in pricing of everything. So we can't just look at it and say, well, we need 10% more income. Let's put up the price is up 10%. It won't work like that. And if it was that easy, everybody would do it. I know you have spoken with Councillor Willits, and he's given him a little bit more detail. I mean, just on a couple of specifics, coming out of this year, we've got 500,000 of new homes bonus. I'm guessing that's probably coming out of the 948,000 of new strategic priorities, in which case I just wondered sort of which ones we're cutting or not doing this year. Next year we've got, I think, 1.774 million of new homes bonus going into the main budget to make up some losses. Again, we've had we're predicting a drop on new homes bonus. We're predicting 3.262 million for next year. So I just wondered if you've got any idea out of, I think we had 1.591 for one-off schemes, but that doesn't cover it all. Which out of, you know, affordable housing allocation, RIF, one-off schemes, sort of where you feel that you're taking that money from. On the commercial companies, yeah, very, very difficult. I suspect governance and audit will spend a lot of time getting into the details as to what each of them is doing. I know the direct income was 2.8 million, but it's very complicated because we have the service agreement. So that's not the net amount we receive from them. They provide income to us, but they're also a customer for us as well, because we provide back office services to them. So actually trying to work out in the wash how they actually affect our bottom line, I appreciate isn't easy. I suppose what we do have to watch is that obviously commercial companies are struggling at the moment for lots and lots of reasons. And one of the things they're struggling with is cash. I suppose my other question is, now there are a lot of companies making calls to shareholders for cash flow at the moment. Our commercial companies only have one shareholder, which is us. So the only person they're going to come to is us. So I suppose my question is really, what is the cash flow situation in the commercial companies? And are we actually at the moment in a situation where we're having to cover losses with actual cash from the council side of things? On parking revenue, our predicted income was 2.8 million, I think, for this year. So I'd just be interested to know what we're actually predicting within this forecast as our car parking income for 2021. Inflationary pressures, I'm a little bit concerned whether perhaps we haven't taken account of that enough, because I think they are a danger. Just looking at it logically, I know inflation is 0.8% this month, but if you've got every manufacturing company is having to change their manufacturing processes with social distancing, if you're looking on extra costs and distribution, air freight is about 4 times what it was 3 months ago. You are going to have, I think, quite significant inflationary pressures coming through in the next year or so. So we do need to think about whether that might be an issue for us. We've got very used to very low inflation for many, many years. There might be a danger there. On NEGC, I don't want to talk about the details of NEGC. That's a local plan issue, and it's for another time, really. I do think paragraph 2.5 in the report, I think if anybody remembers the Yes Minister, I think Sir Humphrey politically would have probably described it as courageous. My feeling is it's a little bit misleading. As things stand, NEGC owes CBC just over £300,000. I know there's other factors. I know there's shareholder agreements and that, and I'll come to those in a moment. But what we're actually saying, what we're going to do, is a bit like we've got a bloke down the pub owes us £10, if everybody remembers what a pub was. So what we're going to do is we are going to go down to the pub and we are going to give the man £12, and then he will give us £10, and therefore we no longer have a debt and everything's sorted. So what we're doing is we're giving them £100,000 for them to pay us 313 back. Now that's fine, but it's my issue is that sentence implies to the cabinet, and it implies to councillors, and it implies to the public that doing so is of a financial advantageous nature to CBC in terms of our bottom line. It's not. What it does is it gives £350,000 away. So that's fine and okay, but I'm not that happy with the wording on it. Yes, the shareholder agreement, there are legal aspects, there is goodwill and relationships with other authorities. I accept all that, and that is a very fair point to make. But if that is the main reason for paying it, then that's what I think the sentence needs to say. So paragraph 12.2 in the report, I think that is probably correct. But 12.3, I don't think is right, like 2.5, because it is implying again that it is financially advantageous to us to do so. I should also point out that the 313,100,000 is almost exactly another 2.5% on the council tax as well. It writes off a debt. It doesn't really recover anything. So I do think as a panel we should recommend that the wording of that is changed to something slightly more honest. That doesn't mean to say that it can't be approved or whatever, but I just think it implies to people looking at it that it's us getting money back by voting for it, but it's not really. It's us buying £100,000 of goodwill. Sorry, it was a bit long. Sorry.
That was an interesting string of questions there, Paul. Some of them weren't questions, they were observations really, but there we are. I'll ask Paul if he could to give you the facts on, I think, car parking, for example. I suggest that rather than get into the individual numbers of where different parts of the pot of finances go, that we accept that we'll provide yet more detail on a future occasion, which will be a month away. I'm happy to do it in between if that's useful, but I think it's probably a better use of our time. But it's up to you, Madam Chair, to come back to that.
I wasn't expecting you to have them to hand. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But the point we take, which is it will be a help to all members to see where all the source. It's a summary report. It's a reset, is the way I would put this. So all that we have is being redistributed in ways we couldn't imagine, and that gets you to the point about new strategic priorities. And again, subject to what Paul or Dan might want to ask, I'll say the obvious, which is it follows that those headlines and intentions are going to have to be really scrubbed hard. We've already gone into the pot. Dan and colleague are taken out of the initial allocations of feasibility work, what we needed to meet some of the COVID-related costs. So we're already acknowledging internally the need to go through all of this to test what was set down as an honourable set of medium-term aspirations and objectives, and make sure we reshape it for the money that we will have, and alive to the fact that recovery will be one of the prime tests. So we'll be looking through the NSPs and sort of judging. And for me, I have to be frank and say, jobs will be in there somewhere. I want to see us, because I think we all know what's coming towards us, which is a cavalcade of bad news for individuals, people's businesses. So in our small way, anything we can do that would be helpful to that is going to be useful. So it's a complete reset, Paul, is the way I will put this. And we'll share that as when we have the chance to go through it in detail. Now, Dan may have done all this work, but if he hasn't told me. So I think we're at the foothills of the challenge, but he can add to that. But let me just, before I hand it back to Paul and Dan, address the point about NEGC. The nature of this drafting, it pops around the individuals. My text you might not have liked. This is the gutted version of my defence of NEGC, and I try to be even-handed when I do that, because it's our people and it's our council officers and it's our shareholder objectives. After all, it's us and our partners. Can I just say this one more time? This is intended to be only factual. It's not, to use your words, I've put them back to you, it's not intended to mislead, to say the obvious. It's not meant to be, your quote, dishonest, right? It's meant to be as simple as we can make it, and therefore, and we have failed to offend none, right? It is just a simple statement of fact. The letter's been out, no problem. Well, lots of problems, but we'll deal with those. We have an obligation. I think you're happy with 12.2. Therefore, the intention is to recommend, consistent with those obligations, that at some stage our partners quite like us to pony up our share, right? Especially when the biggest irritant, when we last discussed this in full chamber, has been resolved, and perhaps in a way that doesn't please anybody, which is we have got at least the makings of a way ahead with 1, not 3 garden communities, and all that will follow from that, good or ill, depending where you see it. That allows us to say it's a reasonable thing to do, given we've got that clarity, to bring this back towards full council. That's 12.2, and 12.3 just says it's an issue of fact, because, and you were involved in these conversations, it irritated a number of councillors that we were playing a banker's role. So we're just trying to acknowledge the fact that that completely not unusual role has meant that we're holding some monies on the books because we act for all the 4 authorities and indirectly for government. So it's intended to be, and it is factual in my view. I'd ask you to be a little bit more generous on this one occasion. On which basis I'll pass to Dan and Paul on the other points if they've got something to add.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go into detail about sort of what's happening with the other priorities. I think that the realities, as David's put it, they need to be looked at in the light of the crisis that's unfolded, and the work that the council needs to do on recovery, which will come to a future scrutiny panel meeting. There is a paper going to the cabinet meeting this week, so I'd encourage councillors to look at that report, which will give a flavour of some of the objectives and priorities that are being established for the council's recovery work across a number of strands of activity picking up on community, the economy, our customers, and indeed the council's operations as a whole, set within that financial context. So that work is very actively happening at officer level, and we will continue to develop that and share it in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas, does that...
yes, it does. I just want to pick up on one comment. If at any stage the word dishonest came out, it was meant in very general terms. I wasn't accusing anybody of being dishonest about anything. And
no worries.
Took that, I withdraw it and apologise. That wasn't. I don't really remember saying that, but if I did, then I withdraw that absolutely. Yeah, I would still I just feel that anybody reading the paper just would look at it and think, well, actually, why are we doing this? We're doing it because it gets us some money, but it doesn't, as we know. And I just am concerned because we do have to be transparent. We have to be transparent for the public and councillors and everybody else. I'm just concerned that a quick read of it doesn't really read that. And I do absolutely understand the goodwill aspect and relationship with other authorities, and that is a big factor. And I think actually maybe that should be in there somewhere, or more so. But thank you very much for your answers, and I'm sorry I went into a bit too much detail, and I think maybe we'll continue this discussion another time. I'm sure there'll be many conversations to be had, but thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter, did you have any comments or questions, please?
I've got no questions at the moment, but no, fantastic detail, and clearly challenging for trying to work out what it might look going forward. So no, I'll be interested to see how this moves on. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. Forgive my voice. Just looking at 6.17 with regard to additional costs and budget pressures. That's fairly stark reading, isn't it? So my question is, we may all be in this together. That does give me a great deal of comfort that if we're all in this together in a negative fashion. So my question really is, how much confidence do the team have that 20% support from central government can be shifted upwards? Or is it as brutal and honest and as stark as it's written on the paper? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. The politician in me tells me that the pain is going to be shared across all of the state sector, but that doesn't deny the possibility. And ought to be in a fair-minded spirit. And this is for Paul in particular. We ought to acknowledge that the government has done extraordinary things, particularly economically, to try and maintain business and the nation, frankly. Every rule book has been torn up, quite interesting for all the politicians, frankly, in terms of what was and wasn't acceptable money tree policy. And for me, it feels absolutely right. So my colleagues may not like this, but I mean, I have to acknowledge, as does everybody, that there will be a limit to how far it will go. And I think, Councillor Hogg, I'd be surprised if we don't get something more, but I'd be surprised if it's a great deal more. My concern, I have to say, as much as anything else, and Councillor Bentley would have a good perspective from the huge money tree that is Essex County Council, is that national priorities, for example, coming out of this, like social care and the need to fix that, are going to be right to be addressed as priorities. They're going to have an impact elsewhere. There's the attitude to borrowing is rightly focused more now on the cost of borrowing, which is extraordinarily low. I think on some of our, Paul Cook will know this, some of our bonds are actually making money. People are actually wanting us to take their money. Is it safer than the alternatives, which tells you a lot about the world that we're in. So the short answer, I think, but I'm interested for other views, would be, I'd hope we'd get more, but we're not going to get it all. That's absolutely for sure. We'll be expected in some fashion to carry some of that load, I think, but none of us can absolutely know. Dan's very well tuned in, and Paul has his network, which strange things happen between senior finance officers. Who knows what they can add? Dan, you got anything to say?
Thank you.
Yes, happy to. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't feel at all confident that we'll get any further significant government compensation for our loss of income or additional costs. I think the government has, from the start, were saying that, you know, actually don't worry, go ahead, do what you need to do, and we'll cover the costs. And that has been tempered over the period of the crisis, understandably, I think, because of the massive investments that have had to be made to prop up the economy, not least the job retention scheme, which is an example where we have we are securing some additional financial support, because as a council we took the decision, although there was a discouragement from government for public sector organisations to apply for that scheme, we felt it was appropriate for certain staff who were unable to work, particularly staff who are shielded or working in services which are very heavily income reliant. In other words, it wasn't really a double counting of public funds. The initial 1.6 billion contribution that the government made to local authorities benefited the council to the tune of 76,000. The second 1.6 billion was a much more significant contribution of almost 2 million. Which was surprising. I think that was thanks to a huge amount of lobbying by organisations, including the District Councils Network and the Local Government Association, to recognise the fact that district councils are disproportionately affected by loss of income and those broader economic impacts, whilst of course the county councils and the metropolitan boroughs all have the additional hugely costly services of social care that Councillor Bentley referred to earlier on. So no council that I'm aware of is being supported to 100% of their forecast loss of costs and income. I think our assumptions back in early March were pretty much on the money as to what we're saying in this paper now, and that reflected at that point what was our central scenario. In other words, you know, not a total catastrophe in terms of the economic impact, and not a total, Christmas present in terms of any government support. So we think that reinforces our assessment that the assumptions we're making are are broadly okay. But as I say, we'll continue to review that. But no, I'm afraid, Councillor Hogg, in relation to 6.17, I think it is as pessimistic as it sounds, and we're planning for that.
Can I just come back, Madam Chairman, just to say that I wasn't poo-pooing the support that we'd already got from central government. They've done an excellent job right across the board. It was just the starkness of the reality of the situation, I think, is not lost on us. And I think the Colchester residents are fully able to take on board the seriousness of it, and will support us in what we need to do to get the show back on the road. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we've got 174k, Dan, any extra for town centre security or safety work, COVID secure work.
I mean, just briefly on that, so it's 174,000, but interestingly, it's not simply a grant payment. That is very much money that we can draw down based on specified expenditure, temporary measures that will help with the opening up of town centres and getting shops going from later this month.
Make sure we do.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, did you have any questions on this paper?
Thank you, Chair. No questions from me, but thank you, Councillor King, Paul and Dan for your responses. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I was going to ask Councillor Hogg's question, and it's difficult listening to hear that it's looking to be as pessimistic as it's set out in that point in the report. I mean, I think Councillor Dundas made the point well, that there were probably quite hard limits on the ability of councils like Colchester to claw back lost income, and I think the government is really the only place that we're ever going to be able to get that level of money back from. And I think I guess there's euphemistic language in the report, as Councillor Dundas picked up as well. And I think if we're looking at major cuts to services and things like that, then that's something we're going to have a real job to kind of communicate to residents, and the reasons for that. One thing that I wanted to ask about was there's a point 6.3, I think, in the report, which talks about the Bank of England's forecasts, and I'm just wondering how reliant we are on, or our kind of workings are on that forecast, because it's for the economy to shrink 14% in 2020 and grow 15% in 2021, and some of us might think that's quite optimistic to have that sharp of a bounce back, especially if people do end up losing jobs, if businesses do end up going out of business. That's a substantial loss to the economy that will take time to recover, and unlikely to happen overnight, you might think. So I'm wondering, first of all, how reliant are our figures on that particular forecast?
From my perspective, there it's contextual. We wanted between us just to make plain, and which is why beneath that you've got the other graphics and although it's small print, the data. I found the Price Waterhouse, and there are a number of different examples out there of assessments, but that was particularly helpful to me. They and the OBR. Most now expect that there will not be a V shape, but also, thank goodness, it won't be an L. This is going to be, I think, that third graphic and 6.5, I think fits what most commentators think, but you can pick and choose amongst them. They are helpful to us because I think I would say, and Paul had his spin to this, so what we do is look at that and say, when we're looking at all the individual work streams, because some parts of the country will do worse than us and some might do better, but we've got reasons, as described earlier, to have some confidence in our strengths and in our local economy, and the fact that, frankly, Southeast is going to be an easier place to sort of pick yourself up and dust yourself down than some other parts of the country, without, again, that big picture set of enablers, like being close to such a huge magnet such as London, but far enough away to have some attractions, and actually some attractions in the changes in the economy aren't going on. But just to illustrate the fact, big picture really does matter, does illustrate the challenge. It allows us to do a cross-check across, which is why we're doing it. And Paul does this as part of his day job in terms of things like borrowing rates and so on. So we are watching what happens, but it's we are being prudent in our judgments, taking the advice from all of those who have a responsibility for delivery, for example, of an income-giving service. But none of us expect a straight bounce back. We're going to be hurt by this, and locally, we should have confidence in our capacity to get through it. And actually, you can take real confidence what central government's been prepared to do, but there's going to be a long struggle. Some of the best work I've seen talks about the 90% economy. That there's going to be a long tail for a long time. And if those of you who are interested in what international trade does for an individual nation's wealth, would see those big relationships eventually trickle down, have an impact upon jobs in London and the Southeast and across the country. Their trading patterns which drive or don't tourism and trade. So absolutely, it's one of those rare occasions, Lorcan, where that big picture matters. But I wouldn't use that as one place to go. I'd go to 6.5. That looks better to me, or worse, but more realistic.
Thank you. And second question around co-creation, and I fully support and very positive if we go down that route. And I'm just wondering, are we still talking to unions, and will we be involving unions and getting their view in that process as well?
Pass to Dan if I may, but my expectation would be absolutely we'd do what a good employer does.
Yeah, we talk to the unions very regularly and have been throughout this crisis, as we referred to before in the response paper. You know, the changes we've made to services, the decisions we've taken around furloughing and all the rest of it have always been in consultation with the unions. So yeah, it's important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of things. They may have been covered slightly with some of the other questions. I'm not overly sure. Under budget strategy, 11.3, talking about reducing investment in non-priority services. I was just wondering whether we have an idea of what those non-priority services might be, or is that part of the scenario planning?
I'll ask, Dan picked this up, but my perspective is we're so early in the process, it's a statement more of intent, but it'll have to become real. You know, Dan shepherds the organisation to help to get the books to balance. Now, the politicians and others, the senior team, are going to have to make some decisions. But back to the earlier remarks, Madam Chair, a lot of this will be about how we work with others. So we shouldn't give up on service quality, but we absolutely should be completely flexible about how we deliver a service. But Dan, you've got the tough job of starting that work with your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a question that can be answered today. I think it's a very high level sense of the budget strategy and just a statement of fact that clearly, if choices have to be made about where to put the money needs to go into the services that are of greatest priority to the council. So that it's really not more than that. But as I said before, I think there'll be a number of factors which come to play, both the strategic plan and the revisions that have been made to that in recent months. The work on the recovery programme is particularly important because that reflects our very latest thinking and emergent thinking in terms of what needs to change and what the new or next normal looks like for Colchester, and all those things will come into play in deciding where we need to make investments to secure the outcomes we need to for Colchester.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether any projects, whether underway now or planned, have been shelved completely yet.
Dan, do you want to
We
take
haven't
this?
taken any decision to shelve projects at this point, no.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I think, what will the impact be of the use of reserves to the extent outlined?
Well, I mean, I'll start and I'll ask Paul to perhaps round this off, because some of this is, you know, confidence piece. He and I have had a number of high quality conversations about how far we can go, and it's been great to have his experience and his view. So I would say the consequence of doing this, frankly, is obvious. I mean that respectfully, Madam Chair, because it's a great question. It's that we can give ourselves a degree of breathing space, not a lot. We've still got a huge challenge. And I personally think we'll be back to look at reserves again in the context of that big picture that Councillor Whitehead was talking about. You know, we get some confidence in the big picture. We see where we're at in each of our 16 works, income streams. Then that the headlines, which will affect then reserve use or future reserve use, all of that will sort of flex and flux. But it's just great news that we have built up over time enough resilience to be able to make this decision and still leave down in each individual line of the reserves something to ensure that we can still respond to events. So from my perspective, we're in a position still that we could still respond to a call on reserves in a traditional fashion. Something's happened that needs a large sum of money being spent, capital reserves or whatever it might be, or that we respond to deterioration in the circumstance. So we've still got a bit of give, but that's my view, looking at the numbers and the space for judgment, which is mine in my view. But Paul's our head of finance. Paul, what's your take?
Okay, I think I'm wondering if maybe I didn't quite word that correctly, Ria. I don't think I did. Is my impression that the reserves, a lot of the reserves were already earmarked for future projects.
All right.
So because they are now being, a massive chunk of it is being used, how is that going to affect on those future projects?
Well, Paul, do you want to pick up on that and see if I need to round it?
Thank you, Chair. So this quite significant amount, the 8.350 million, we're looking at a number of reserves that can be used. And I suppose I've got to say up front that this is the whole purpose of reserves, to cater for some unforeseen situation. This is quite a serious situation. So just running briefly down the main areas that we're looking at. The first is every financial year, budget managers apply to carry forward unspent budget the previous year. So we're looking at taking quite a significant element of that. Increasing nowadays, government grants are paid without any, again, that's withholding. We have quite a significant business rates reserve, which is used to safeguard against business rate losses. So that's somewhere we're going. We have quite a renewal reserve. So, I mean, the implication of taking from there would be that either repairs might have to be delayed or funded from other budgets, perhaps by borrowing in the capital programme. And of course, we have a general reserve, which in the last budget setting, we set at 10% of net expenditure, around £2 million. So we could look at having a less requirement given the sort of emergency situation. I think we're trying to spread the impact of difficult decisions. I hope that's useful.
If I could, Madam Chair, I think perhaps even more directly, I think you're talked about projects in your last version. The logic's plain that there will be less money available for projects and ambitions. I think that's the logic. And looking at what the senior team had to do to go through those carry forwards that Paul talked about, and if you look at those individual lines of expectations, in effect, sometimes they're just holding in a budget line against the probability of being turned on. Other times, and these are mostly more micro to my eye, but they're not going to happen because we can't put them in two places. In terms of the big picture, we talked about the new strategic priorities. I think that perhaps is the most relevant point. Many of those had a big capital component. So I think for me, where we'll be, and I'll look forward to what Dan's bringing to us, but we're also going to be looking together at the wider capital programme. That's easier, as colleagues will understand. There's still rightly a rule set. We have to forward what we do. We've got some advanced plans. We've got projects about to deliver, which rightly might attract some more investment to get them over the line and to make the most of their potential. So I think it's going to be a mixed story, but the bottom line has to be, it's going to be more difficult to do what we plan to do. And back to what Dan and I said earlier, new strategic priorities have got to be scrubbed with a view to their effect upon recovery. And it may be that broadly they have a similar effect. I mean, that's just conversation that we'll have to walk up and down. I'm fixated on the fact that shiny stuff is great, but shiny stuff that draws people to your borough, to your town better, shiny stuff that draws people to your town and borough and creates jobs and income and has a positive spin. All of that. That's, I think our criteria have to change a bit, even if they don't make big differences. But actually the pot has got to be smaller. So that's really got to be the essence of the answer. But it does depend on how we sculpt them. And it does depend on big decisions like the town deal fund and how that could be shaped for recovery. That's a big pot, and that will make a big difference if we can secure it.
It will make a huge difference. Thank you. So does anyone else have any more comments? Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a suggestion, actually, really. I was going to suggest a a slightly different wording for the paragraphs on NEGC, and I don't want to spend too long on NEGC. It is actually really a small thing in the context of what we're talking about tonight, and I do understand that. But my recommendation is on paragraph 2.5, I would simply cut it to recommend to the 15th of July 2020 Council the release of the 2019-20 NEGC contribution of 350k as set out in section 12 of the report, full stop. I cut the end bit. And 12.3, I just changed to release of the contribution will enable the financial position to be put in good order ahead of determining future action. I just think that's short, simple, factual, and nobody can argue with any of it. And to be brutally frank, I think it will stand more chance of success. But that is my suggestion.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I must admit, I was wondering how I was going to word that. So that's actually really, really helpful. So what was the wording you put forward for 12.3?
It just changed it to release of the contribution will enable the financial position to be put in good order ahead of determining future action.
Okay.
It's very similar. It just changes it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You're Councillor King, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Sorry to hold you up. Your time passes. We're here to serve your process. But I missed Councillor Paul Dundas's 2.5 because I had a clock interruption. Just the wrong moment. Would you mind, Paul, just reading that out to me again?
Yeah, of course. Hang on. Let me just go back to the original. Let me just find it. Sorry, I'm on the second monitor here. Here it is. 2.5. I would just basically leave it as
full
it
stop.
is.
There's a full stop after.
Full stop after this report.
Yeah.
So to take out the enabler of the recovery of Colchester Council's costs, because I think that is, I get what it means and I get why it's in there. But at the end of the day,
I agree.
They owe it anyway. It's about the relationship between us and our other authorities. That's the important thing. That's what we're really. It's more about that than the money. I think we all agree.
No, thank you. I think that's absolutely is the essential point. The rest is an important subset of it. It's about us doing what we should with our partners. I quite get that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more comments? So we've got those 2 points that we need to decide on as to whether we're going to take that to Cabinet on Wednesday. Now, it was also mentioned about pre-scrutinising the scenario planning as it emerges, but that's not really something to take to Cabinet. That's just something that we can do and agree now. And I think Councillor King would probably be quite happy with that we pre-scrutinise.
I would, Madam Chair, always look forward to good debate. We're the better for it. I don't want to hold you up, but we had a couple of slides show you the forward schedule. That might fit your point but that's your choice, Madam Chair.
It's 9 o'clock now, isn't it? I haven't had my tea yet.
Then I think we answer our own question.
Yeah, I think this is
Madam
something.
Chairman, I think you can just leave it as simply as that. If members are willing, that we would set up a pre-scrutiny of this and work with officers and Councillor King to make sure that happens in good order.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Absolutely. So we've got 3 suggestions there. So that's the 2 that Councillor Dundas put forward and the one that Councillor Bentley had just put forward. Can we do this? I better go through the protocol. Councillor Bentley.
Yes, 4 on all 3 of them, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Against all 3 of them.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
4.
Councillor Hogg.
4.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Against all 3.
Thank you.
Councillor Davies, could I just confirm that you're voting for the...
I would be voting for them, yes, sorry, I didn't say.
So I make the votes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favour, 2 against, no abstentions. So the vote is carried.
Thank you for that. Excellent. In that case, it just leaves me to say thank you very much to everyone who's come to talk on that item. It was a good discussion, I think. It ironed out a few things, and if anyone wants to leave now, then please do. Not the panel, obviously. We still have the work programme. As you know, we will be having a meeting on the 9th of June to go over the work programme, mainly because in the next meeting, the work programme is ridiculously heavy. It has been generally accepted now that agendas need to be shorter. We need to have 1 or 2 substantive items, as has been proved tonight, really. That 2 items is really a little bit heavy. And because the meetings do take longer, there's no getting away from it. So we will be we need to look at removing from the work programme anything that can be done by another panel, and we will be having those conversations with governance and audit to see if there's anything they can take from us. But also I think we need to just get our heads together, and for the next meeting that will be purely on the work programme, and we can just throw some ideas around there to see how we can make that work properly. Councillor Vaughan.
Sorry, I put my hand up for earlier. I'm going to lower it now.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Bentley.
Well, I think we just wait to June the 9th. We don't need to go through it now, do we?
Yeah.
There is a question I think we need to ask ourselves. Some years ago, we used to have a finance and audit scrutiny panel, affectionately known as FAST, and we got rid of that. And I think there's a question coming now whether we need to reinstate that or put it on another committee. I mean, tonight's been very good, but it's very heavy. And there's an argument about looking at general policy and looking at finance. The other thing, just to put in your heads, everyone, is we did, because of the lockdown, cancel the crime disorder panel, which means we haven't held one for a year. And whether we are content, we just let it roll on, or we want to bring that forward. I just leave that with you. I don't think we need to discuss it now, but just one for the 9th.
Thank you. I think there's another one coming up in September.
Yeah, that's the case, Chair.
We did have one last autumn, Chair. I think September, October-ish. So we hasn't. It's not quite a year since.
Yes, but sorry, it's 2 a year we normally have, and we haven't had that. So, and that's what we need to get back to. But I just leave that for people to think about.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, so the last item will be really rolled over onto the next meeting, so we don't really need to go into that now. So it just leaves me to thank everyone for their input and thank all the DSO officers for your support, and for all the officers for your support, really, as to, I think, I don't think it's gone too badly for the first public one. So thank you all very much. Thank you for all the reports and support, and see you all on Wednesday.
Yes, and thank you for chairing it so well, and the officers too. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
The truth
Thank you,
will be in the
officers.
Gazette.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.